I'm on the clock in 8 Underdog slow drafts. We're going to make those picks today. We're going to answer questions. I'm getting started a little earlier today. Might go long again. Going on vacation tomorrow. Won't be back for about a week. We'll talk about some plans today as well. This is Stealing Signals. Let's go. Welcome in, guys. Glad to have you here. Let's jump right into the lobby. I mean, I don't have anything super pressing, and most of what I'm on the clock on right now is super flex. I've gotten to the point. I love Paul. This is perfect. Oh shit, here we go again. And I mean, I think the same thing. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna fire it up. But this is your guys' fault, man. I mean, let's not jump immediately in the lobby. Let's talk about the channel for a second. Tomorrow will be the 1 month anniversary of the first stream I fired up on May 20th. We've done 11 videos. This is the 12th in 1 month. That's probably more than I was anticipating doing. But I also wasn't anticipating getting to 1K subscribers in 2 weeks. I wasn't, 2.5 weeks, whatever it was. I wasn't anticipating having, you got to hit 4,000 watch hours to be able to monetize as well. I wasn't anticipating having 6,000, almost 7,000 watch hours already at this point. I wasn't anticipating all of my videos. I heard about all the YouTube stuff that the audience tends to fall off right away. Me starting with all this conversation is the kind of thing that leads to people leaving the stream typically immediately. You have people, when you look at the analytics, that are only hanging out for 30 seconds and leave. All my videos, I think, have over 1,000 views, and the average watch time on all of them is like a half an hour, which is like insane. My last one, I put a huge clickbaity title on it, the Dallas Cowboys wide receiver that could be the next Puka Nacua, which we didn't even talk about until like 3 hours in. And a bunch of people kind of gave me some crap about that being so clickbaity. It got over 2,000 clicks. It's got, I think, my most views, or it's definitely pacing to be the video that does the best. It still has an average view duration of well over 30 minutes. It's almost 40 minutes for all of those, 2,000 clicks. It just blows my mind how much support you guys have given me in this project. I didn't expect like the analytics and all that stuff to be like this. So I've had an absolute blast doing it for you guys. I'm going to continue to hit subscribe, turn on the notifications, like it, all that stuff. The bigger and better this is, the more I'm going to do it. Like it's just that simple. I appreciate all the support. GM to all you guys. We got the gear giveaway that did we talk? I think we said after we got over 1,000 subscribers, we had to do something, which I don't know if we ever did. I don't have any Stealing Signals gear yet, but maybe I got to develop some and then I can give some away. I love the half an hour is a weak sauce watch time. Best ball's blown up. It is. And I like to talk about it. I like to talk about football, player takes, all of that kind of stuff. Basically, the only plan I had is like I thought it would be fun to put all to just analyze a random team each week, because I feel like that's something that I'm good at. Is like you ask me a question, I'm going to have takes on it. I'm going to be able to go into it. I can do it sort of free form. So we'll pick a random team, we'll spin a wheel, and it'll be fun to do the remember some guys thing. That was like the one plan. That's the one segment we have. Otherwise, I just sit here and answer your guys' questions, which is an absolute blast. But I mean, like, what is it that you guys are even here for? Like, as long as you are, I don't know. I mean, I have so much fun with it. Really appreciate you guys. So what I was going to say about the, well, a couple things. One, while I'm on all this topic, I'm going to Montana tomorrow with the family. Both my parents are from Montana. We used to go back there to see my grandparents as a kid. I live in Washington, for those of you who don't know, but that's why I do all these slow drafts. Washington is a state where you can't fast draft Underdog. When I was a kid, we would drive back to Montana in summers and winters, go visit my grandparents, go out to the farm, drive the four-wheelers in the summers, ride the snowmobile in the winters. Fantastic, experiences throughout my whole childhood. My grandparents eventually retired to Flathead Lake, right by south of Glacier National Park. People who are familiar with Montana tend to know Flathead Lake. It's the largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi. Fantastic, fantastic, beautiful place. I'm telling you all this because I'm going there for family reasons, and yet every time I leave the state, I enter more slows. And here's the question, can you do fast drafts there? You can't. You can't draft in Montana. You can't draft in Idaho, which I have to drive through to get to Montana. There's only like 7 states in the entire U.S. where you can't do it. I think it's 7. But 3 of them are the 3 states that I'm going to be in. The closest I'm going to be to just crossing over a border to somewhere where I could do it would add 2 hours to our drive time. It's already an 8-hour drive. I'm taking my wife and kids, obviously. It's a family trip. Hard for me to just, like, I make the drive down to the Oregon border solo when I do it. Hard for me to justify them already being in the car for 8 hours, having to sit for 2 more hours, up to 10 hours. The Northwest sounds terrible. It's brutal that I can't even, while driving through Idaho, jump into some fasts, some slows. What I would have to do is like in Eastern Washington, dip down into Oregon. That's like the closest I'll get because Montana's huge. I can't even dip down into Wyoming. I love this. I'm going to accidentally get lost. Sorry, honey. I don't know what the GPS is talking about. We're going the right direction. And it's so funny because we've made the drive so many times, even since, I met my wife and we started our family and have had our kids. My girls are so excited to get back out to, we go to Polson and Flathead Lake. They've just been talking about the stairs at Nana's house and, just the view and all these different things that it's been so cool since we planned this trip that they're just like, oh, I'm so excited to go to Nana's for this reason and for that reason. So anyway, it was my Nana. It's their great Nana. Still kicking and doing fantastic. So that's going to be a lot of fun, but I won't be able to enter any drafts. I'll be finishing up the ones that I'm already in. I entered a ton of super flexes when I was in Arizona earlier this month because I did some fasts in Arizona right when the puppy but super flex opened and really enjoyed them because the QB ADP was kind of broken at first. Some of you guys in the chat mentioned that corrected really quickly. I've noticed that doing the super flex drafts slow is both one annoying because the ADP did correct, and then it was just I thought there was this edge and people didn't know how to draft super flex best ball, and it clearly was just like a 2-day edge. And then I also thought that it would be fun because I like drafting in these highly variable drafts. I had a great time drafting that specific format fast because I enjoy reading the room when it goes heavy. You can go a lot of different directions. You can have a really heavy QB room. You can have a really light QB room. And then the influence on running back, wide receiver, and tight end, because all 4 positions matter so much, you can go a lot of different directions with your build. Superflex is super fun. The other element of it is because all the positions matter so much, when you do when you do a fast draft, that's fun. And you're thinking about it and you're correlating throughout. And I had a blast doing these as fast drafts. When you're doing a slow drafts, and the issue I run into with all my slow drafts is towards the end of the draft, I got to figure out who's on this team. How do I correlate? Am I going to use the star method? Whatever. The reasons that the Leg Up announced their new Sidekick, which is a fantastic tool. I don't have it on, they don't have it for Chrome, and I do all of this on Chrome, so I don't have it on here, but I had access to it as a sneak peek and was able to play with it a little bit. It's a Firefox app. It's a really fun tool. But the reasons that those types of things exist, when you're in a bunch of slow drafts, you can jump in and it'll immediately ground you on okay, instead of just looking at ADP, here's the types of players that fit for this build because they're correlated in those things. I saw some commentary about the overlays, and I already got asked here in the chat as well, what is your take on all these overlays coming out, good or bad for the ecosystem? I think the concern about it is just wildly overblown. I saw it come from some of the poker community, and then a lot of discussion. Even our buddy John Warner at Badge Bros was then commenting on it. I don't know where the original conversation came from. I thought it was very thoughtful, and I appreciated that opinion. And I think all opinions are, when they're thoughtful and well thought out, are very much welcome. But John's point was, it's a little bit different than some of the poker tools that are out there. I'm not from the poker world. And so the question was like, how does it relate back to these poker overlays? That, and they were talking about this concept of GTO, game theory optimal. That to me is like the wrong way to frame it, because poker is a game with odds, and we know what is optimal ultimately, or you could boil down the percentages to what is optimal, because ultimately you're making bets on how many cards are in the deck to hit certain outs that you have in your hand. You're going for a straight draw. It means this is what we know. These are all the percentages. And then we also, like, the bets are all numerically based. And so how much you would raise and how you would play the different bets is going to be relative to, the pot size and the chips you have. I was, as a teenager, I was into poker. That was the boom. That was when Chris Moneymaker, won the World Series of Poker, and it was it was on ESPN. I played a lot of home games as a teenager. I had Super System by Doyle Brunson, but I didn't play a lot of like online poker. I wasn't deep into the poker weeds like a lot of the people that are in the fantasy football space. So I know like a little bit. I can talk like to the degree that you've just heard me talk about it, but I'm not somebody to trust on anything poker. So I'm just sort of throwing out, my understanding of it. But that is very, very different than the game of fantasy football, which I would consider myself, I always hated the term expert, but at a certain point in my career, I was like, yeah, I mean, I've been asked enough questions and seen enough opinions that are not informed, and not to discredit them. They're people who do this as a hobby, and they have other careers that they are experts at, and they ask people like me questions because this is what I do for a living. So yeah, I mean, I am an expert at this. I think that's fair. And my expert opinion on fantasy football is that you can't GTO fantasy football, man. Like, the profiles are all unique. I'm constantly talking about how every bet is different. Even if you can no one's been able to even like classify players correctly. I've talked about this a lot. I was reading something of my own that I wrote a while back, but like I was talking about, somebody sent me, and I can't remember why I even was rereading this, but in the piece I was writing, and I can't even remember which one it is, or I'd pull it up, but I was talking about how, like, even when you talk about the different wide receivers, there's slots and there's outside receivers, and we know that. But when people try to classify that, it's still impossible to understand the subtle differences between what makes Amon-Ra St. Brown an elite player as a slot receiver, and why Hunter Renfrow, who had some really good efficiency metrics at times, was Hunter Renfrow, right? Like, again, this is the comparison I drew while kind of thinking out loud, like I like to do in my newsletter. But the Amon-Ra St. Brown, Hunter Renfrow thing, those guys would be bucketed together, and there's elements of their profiles that would be similar, frankly. And what makes them different, what makes Amon-Ra unique and elite, is maybe a little bit more yak ability after the catch ability, but that's something that, when you bring in Renfrow, like, he actually showed some of that early in his career. So you had to control for the fact that his yak was largely on 2 plays where he caught 2 screens in his rookie year, not screens, quick slants, 2 different times in his rookie year, almost identical plays that were like 60-yard touchdowns that were just broken defensive plays twice in his rookie year. It was so weird, but just out of the slot, got turned loose and ran straight up the middle of the field on a quick slant and got like over 100 yards of yak on these 2 plays. And then people were like, man, this guy's yards per out run's incredible because his after the catch ability is incredible. It really boosted his whole profile on a limited number of routes. And I remember writing about it at the time, like, this is 2 plays. And like, you'll get a lot of people in the fantasy space that will be like, you can't just remove a player's top, 2 plays. And that is bad practice if you don't do it effectively. But you need to be able to be like, that's the context in every player's profile. You need to be able to think critically. I'm going to write a piece later this summer that is going to be a case for using splits data. People have shown that over large, aggregated, sample sizes of large data sets in the fantasy football space, that splits data is not helpful. It's a larger. It minimizes the sample. If you just take like a half season of data and say, well, something changed and this guy was good in the second half of the year, that tends to be less predictive than the full season of data. There's a reason that guy was bad the first half. T.Y. Hilton at home was a smash. We get in the chat. I do think that, I mean, this is kind of the point. I do think there are situations where the aggregate data shows us we shouldn't care about something. And then I also still believe that there are, like, and splits data is an example of this type of analysis, but I do believe there are individual situations where I would put weight on it. My argument about splits data is if you um, realize that you're dealing with small samples across the board and none of it is stable, like, there's so many fantasy analysts that just want to find the most stable thing that you can find. None of it's stable, man. You have to analyze. You have to contextualize. There's no, I mean, we're trying to predict things that are going to happen between, like, where we're at on a small sample scale of what we know about a player. Even if they play 2, 3, 4 years, that's a small sample, man. It's not a lot of data. And we're trying to predict where we're at between now and a point when that data set's going to stabilize, right? Like in baseball, they have like stabilization rates for every stat. People have tried that for football. The bottom line is, like, most of the stats aren't going to stabilize, because what happens is between each of these small data sets, things are changing. So, like I said, 2, 3, 4 years of a player. Well, he's had 2 coaching changes, 3 different quarterbacks. He's a wide receiver. He's had 2 coaching changes, 3 different quarterbacks, and multiple different types of offenses that have used him differently. He's been a deep threat. He's been a shallow guy. I mean, that's an extreme example. A lot of players do have relatively similar usage, but there are a bunch of players in the data set who just I'm sorry, I got distracted by this extremely flattering question. Ben, how did you get so smart and continue to grow? I appreciate the question. I don't have an answer for that. I appreciate it, though. I mean, that's a very kind observation. But the point I was making with the small sample thing is, like, we're trying to predict, like, okay, well, this is where I think the data is going to stabilize, and this is what the player actually is. This is what his mean is. And by the time he gets to that point where the sample is large enough, he's going to change. That's the other element of it. It's like, it's 3, 4 years down the road. Is he taking care of his body the same way, right? Is his nutrition, all that stuff on point? There are some players who are, and they treat it like it's their job, and they should. There are other players who you can just kind of tell, like, don't take care of themselves, man. Like, part of the reason they suck now is, like, this dude's just out of shape or whatever, right? Like, I mean, that they're humans. And then the other part of it is injury. I think we throw everything into injury, but I'm using the, like, nutrition and all of that as part of it. Some of the guys don't need nutrition. Chad Ochocinco, I follow him on Twitter. He's one of my favorite former players. Famously loves to talk about how he eats McDonald's all the time still, and always did. Some guys are just like that. Like, some humans can just eat McDonald's and be, the physique of a Chad Johnson, very lean and still athletic, and it doesn't impact his body. Other guys maybe need to stay really rigorous with their diet and everything in the offseason. Remember Eddie Lacy, right? He's tweeting about how much he loves PF Chang's and comes into camp and he's overweight. And a lot of us are just like, I mean, yeah, I know Eddie Lacy's stats were good last year, but have you seen the pictures of him? Like, I don't want to draft him this year. And it's that, like, that's like the context sometimes. So this all gets back to the question of what I think about the overlays and all this stuff. You cannot GTO fantasy football. You think you can. I mean, I do think things are getting more efficient. I do think that, the way that the draft rooms seek upside and target the types of players that matter is relevant. But I don't believe that an overlay is going to be, and, like, I saw some other comments that are like, yeah, isn't that true of every model? The models are only going to be as good as their inputs, but the inputs in other areas, like in poker, can be more data focused. I think even in, like, fantasy baseball, you could probably argue that this would be more of a concern. I do not have a major concern with it in football. Every time something gets emphasized in the market, it opens up other opportunities. It's too multidimensional of a game, of a sport, of the ways that we analyze the different positions. I've never felt like this is going to be a solved game for anyone. I think when you talk about, like, the poker stuff, you start worrying about the fact that the elite players who worked so hard to gain all this information and study the game so well and learn all these edges, and they know every little thing, they lose their advantage because now everyone else can just automate it and have a computer do all that for them. And now everyone is on that same level, similar to chess, similar to some of these other games. I don't think I have no concern about the market getting a few percentage points better because they're able to use the sidekick to correlate more appropriately. I mean, I guess maybe like a small, like, like that's going to probably impact all of our EV a little bit if more drafters are just able to build competitive teams more frequently. I shouldn't say I have no concern about that. It is a minor thing. I don't believe that it solves the game. I don't even believe it's similar to DFS, which a lot of people have compared it to, because in DFS, you're talking about weekly sims and all of that stuff that gets really advanced. But in I've talked about this with the projections point. Again, this gets back to the models are only as good as their inputs. Projections on a weekly level, guys like Mike Leone and over at the ETR and their team, they can do an incredible job on a weekly level because all the information is known. Other than, some minor things with injury reports on that given week, the roles going into the week, the information that's relevant. You can do a ton of research on, the usage leading into a week, how much to, like, I know Leone's done a bunch of stuff on like decay rates, on efficiency and all that stuff, how I need to project a role based on the past 3, 4, 6 weeks of usage in that season, based on that player's whole career, and then also their efficiency that year in their whole career. And then you wind up with this really great projection for that given week with all the parameters known, matchups known, all of that stuff. All the information is known. Full season projections, by comparison, are fucking trash. It's not the way that you can get, like, I can't say that. Like, so when we're talking about the importance of the inputs, it is so much different. You can't just put in, no one's going to project a full season correctly and put in all the inputs and then optimize a fantasy football draft for a full season. That is not like DFS. That is not comparable at all. That's the whole point, is the projections, whether you can do it to a certain standard, which you can do on a weekly level, and I absolutely don't believe you can do on a full season level. Do I think projections can provide value? Absolutely. I'm working on them right now, and I'll be doing a podcast with Mike Leone over on Establish the Edge, which we've done over the last few years, where we break down every division and every team and talk through our projections and players that we think are under and overvalued based on the research that goes into those projections. But there is so much chaos in an NFL season that there's no way the parameters that we're projecting in off season matter for the way that the whole season can play out. It's all contingencies. It's all range of outcomes. It's all probabilistic thinking, what this means at this end of the player's probabilities, at that end of the player's probabilities. So a tool like the sidekick or an overlay like that is going to tell you ways that are going to speed up for me when I jump into this draft, that I'm doing a bunch of slow drafts right now. It's going to tell me, if I had the sidekick up, these are the quarterbacks you've drafted in this room, and here's how they correlate, and here's some, there's some week 17 correlation on this team, there's some same team correlation, and it gives you the information that, like, oh, this is a draft where probably this type of pick makes sense. The other element of the whole thing is, right now, I mean, some of my feedback to them was I would love to see that tool with just ADP built in, or they're gonna eventually do customizable ranks as well. I think it would be an awesome tool just to have with purely ADP as the driver. But right now, the only thing they have in there is the legendary upside rankings, which me and Pat tend to be very similar in the ways that we view things, and the rankings are going to be similar in a lot of cases, but we have a lot of disagreements too. And there's a lot of stuff that, when I was playing with it and I saw some stuff, I was like, there's no way. Like, there was one where I was at a point in a draft where, Mike Williams correlated for me, and he was higher in ADP than Josh Palmer, but the sidekick was giving me, it was showing that Mike Williams is being boosted for correlation, but it was giving me Josh Palmer ahead of Mike Williams. So even though Mike Williams was higher in ADP and the correlated player, the sidekick was flipping Josh Palmer ahead of him, because in their ranks, there must have been a big enough gap. And that's what I messaged him about. And that tended to be true. And we had a whole conversation about, as Pat and I do, about Josh Palmer and Mike Williams. And I think he ended up changing the ranks actually a little bit based on that and moving Mike Williams a little closer to Josh Palmer. So don't hold that against, it's impossible to get rankings perfect. And I was talking about this in the ship chasing Discord earlier. I love Pat's intellectual flexibility on stuff like that. He's better than anyone at it. He's the type of person whose ranks you should really trust, because he's willing to come off stances and not be really firm about things. Anyway, that's no way critical. My point is, it was an example of where legendary upsides rankings and their player preferences at that time were influencing the suggestion on the sidekick even more than correlation and ADP, which is again an example of the inputs, right? Like, and there's also, some other stuff built into it to intentionally like randomize some stuff, which might have been playing a role there, so that you're not always drafting the exact same team as everyone else who's using it. But I mean, as of right now, like, you're gonna get leans towards the players that leg ups rankings like. You don't have to draft those players. I mean, like, I disagree with a lot of those. A lot of you guys are going to disagree with a lot of those. There is no GTO answer in a lot of these cases. The path through a draft isn't even obvious when it relates to correlation. Like, I'm taking a lot of Jaden Daniels, and I've been put in spots multiple times where Jahan Dotson is the obvious pick from a correlation standpoint, and I'm passing on him because I don't think he's even freaking draftable where he goes. Even as a correlated piece, I'm that disappointed in his profile and his price, the combination. That doesn't typically mean that I'm like taking another wide receiver, but I'm not going out of my way, because often in that range I'm taking running backs is what it comes down to. But I'm not going out of my way structurally to take a receiver in that post wide receiver window range, like round 12 where he goes, just to correlate. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to backdoor this with Luke McCaffrey again. I'm just going to end up with naked Jane Daniels if I have to, because I don't think Jahan Dotson's a good pick. And like, no tool is going to make that decision for me ever. There's no world where I'm going to agree. Every analyst is going to agree. I don't care how great these tools could possibly get. What they would eventually tell you is that you need to actually take Jahan Dotson there based on a full season projection and ADP and whatever other factors they would relate to determine whether or not he's a good pick in that range. ADP would have to be a big driver, but we're all going to have opinions based on our own analysis and our own reasoning and our own context for the different player profiles to be completely out on certain guys, or to be heavily overweight on guys and want to take them even when the correlation's not present. I don't see. Anyway, I didn't intend to go into a big conversation about the overlay and the ecosystem. But it's a good topic for today. It's a popular topic right now, and I do have a strong opinion on it, that even the people that were defending these overlays and where we're at with the technology and all that, my opinion was that even the people that were defending it were maybe not defending it as strongly as they could, which is to say that there is, like, if you think you can GTO full season fantasy football, I would argue that you're a novice at it, that you are not an expert at it, that you're not actually very good, that you have not done it for long enough, that you don't understand. Like, it's the Dunning-Kruger effect that I love to talk about. We're just going to go look up Dunning-Kruger. I would suggest, this is not, again, this sounds derogatory. And again, to go back to the people from the poker space that are voicing a concern about this, I'm not trying to intentionally be rude toward anyone, but this would be, sorry, I'm trying to present the image. This would be the Dunning-Kruger effect is this idea of our knowledge and our confidence in a thing. As we're early in our knowledge lifespan, our confidence is very high. Over time, we get beat down. They call this the Valley of Despair. They call this the peak of Mount Stupid, the Valley of Despair, where once your knowledge grows a little bit more, you learn that you were basically ignorant and overconfident early on in your span. And then you do start to gain a little bit more knowledge and confidence, like over time, with experience, with wisdom. This is the idea of wisdom and this confidence gap that exists. That's why I clicked on this particular visual. You never actually get as confident as people do early on. And I was there. Like, I lived there. I went to the Valley of Despair. And I'm not saying I'm at the expert or whatever. This confidence gap is very true. For me, I would say it's even wider. Like, I don't have massive, as much as I have made some declarations that I'm an expert or this or that, or I'm certain that it can't be GTO, and I sound hyper confident. The fact of the matter is I'm not confident, and that's what's driving this opinion. Is I don't believe that you can get to a place in full season fantasy football where, I mean, it's almost like, I guess there is confidence, because it's almost like I would like to draft against a bunch of automated GTO people who think that ADP is that efficient, because I don't believe ADP is that efficient. And ADP is evolving year to year, and it is getting more efficient, but it's creating other holes. Maybe 5 to 10 years from now, all those other holes get fixed, and the ADP gets that efficient. Like that's the answer you have to get to, where ADP gets that efficient. But I don't know how it does, man. Because one of the things that's interesting about ADP and about fantasy in general, and I was talking about this with someone else, it's a bad industry to be in. Like I do this content. I think it's good content. I love your guys' feedback. You guys give me great feedback. One of the things that doesn't happen is people don't share fantasy content as much as maybe they should, because the people that they would normally talk about it with, you talk about, I learned these golf tips and I send the golf tips to my buddy, but you're playing in leagues against that buddy, right? I mean, this is different than the underdog crowd, but for a lot of people who are in home leagues and stuff, the people that like everyone wants to kind of keep their fantasy analysis to themselves, because the people that they would normally discuss that with around, the water cooler or over beers on the weekend, they're playing in fantasy leagues against, and they think, for better or worse, this content is their edge. And some of the content out there, I would argue, is outdated or just not very good. Even the people that do the new content, a lot of the times are not looking in the right places. And more importantly for me, they are looking in the right places, but they're coming to the wrong conclusions. So they have the right stats, or they talk about the right stats, and then I don't know how they get to the conclusions they get to a lot of the time. But I see all these opinions on Twitter. I see a lot of the conversations. I'm pretty critical of a lot of the stuff that's out there. And because people hold close to the vest where their stuff comes from, one of the things that frustrates me is when I, like, as a content creator, and I was talking about this with somebody recently, I get in these situations where people will be like in the chat here or in my comments in the newsletter, it'll be like, what do you think about this? I heard this from this other analyst. Like, we all meet and all think the same. A lot of times I just want to be like, that person doesn't know what they're talking about, but I can't say that. I'm not trying to be really rude to that person. I consider myself somebody who helps other analysts grow and supports other analysts. I think you'll hear from a lot of young analysts that have worked with me or talked to me over the years that I, probably more so than other people, try to offer as much as I can to bring up to help and try to bring up the next group of analysts, anyone who wants my help. Because I think that's very, very important. And I do think it's important to respect other people's opinions and all of those types of things. But again, like, ultimately, people are getting information from places, and then they're kind of like, that's why they have a viewpoint on something. And a lot of the time I would just disagree with that viewpoint. And so, again, when I start talking about like whether ADP is efficient or not, or can get efficient, or will it be efficient 5 years from now or 10 years from now, there's a lot of analysts out there that have large followings where I just like fundamentally see the game differently than them. Is the way that I'll put it. I analyze it very different than them. So I believe that we're not headed towards, we have moved efficiently. Like, my type of analysis, my segment of the world, comes from RotoViz, comes from Siegel, right? I talk about all that. Pat, Pete, all these people, Leone, a lot of what ETR does. They're not, from the exact same cloth, but they are very sharp over there, and there is a lot of overlap. Nothing but respect for any of the people that I just named. A lot of those people, I would say, like, have won out because ADP is shifting that direction. That's just like sort of the reality. Again, like, this is just me, speaking off the top, but I think that's pretty fair. But that doesn't mean that like everybody agrees with that. Everyone who does content, everyone who has a following. And when I say that a lot of people don't share who they get their fantasy information from, one of the outcomes of that is that those people, like, they also aren't seeking other people's information. Even if they aren't winning their leagues, their home leagues or whatever, they're like, at least I have a unique viewpoint that no one else has. And so they just keep going back to that same site. Like, the legacy sites have these massive followings, and props to them. But like, more than any other industry, the first mover advantage in fantasy football has been massive. The people who started it and were great and helped build it up, and props to them. But they still hold that first mover advantage multiple decades later, even if their content has not been very good for a lot of that time. And I'm not saying that's true. I'm not trying to go at everyone. I'm not saying that's true in any specific case. I'm just saying, even in some situations, if their content's not good, there's the first mover advantage in fantasy football is undeniably stronger, way stronger than in other industries, which leads to some of the disagreement in ADPs and all that stuff. And the thing where people are getting, I don't think it's that hard actually to be better at fantasy football than the market, frankly, because you just got to know where to look for what information I mean, maybe that's too cocky and too overconfident. Part of it is, to be better than the market requires a ton of humility on player takes, which is goes back to like the inputs can't be perfect. But if you are, humble about it and understand range of outcomes type thinking and probabilistic thinking, and that there is a lot of uncertainty, risk, all of that stuff. I mean, maybe it's not as easy as I'm laying on because there are so many factors. But yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to, I don't know. I'm kind of going off and saying that there's a lot of really bad, analysis in the industry. And I'm not trying to say that, but I think we all know that there are, takes out there that are not strong. And there are people that are paying attention to those takes and believe those takes and still think in ways that has kind of been proven over and over again are not the optimal way to approach fantasy football. And so in terms of like even getting closer to game theory optimal, I guess is my point. Even if I don't think it's possible, but in terms of getting closer to it, it's just not, I don't know. I don't think the overlays are a long rant, but I don't think they're a huge concern. I don't think they're coming for best ball the way that poker or even DFS has been, more solved. I would be more concerned about it in the more controllable atmospheres, like the playoff stuff. Like the part of the reason Leg Up developed this sidekick for season long is they had so much success with it with their playoff stuff. Pat wrote about that in his introduction to this thing. It makes more sense to me in the playoff stuff because you can optimize for, the odds that teams are actually making long runs relative to the ADP. And there are, more of that is about just games played rather than like fantasy scoring. Like the projections aren't the whole game. I don't know. I don't know how to think through that, but I don't know. That's sort of my take on it. I can't believe we're at 37 minutes of this podcast. I can't believe I just did that take for as long as I did. But if you're new around here, subscribe, like, follow the streams. This is what we do. I just talk about something for 30 minutes and then come out of it the other end. And I'm like, I just blacked out. Where were we? What was I supposed to be doing? Oh yeah, I said I was going to do some picks early on. I was complaining a little bit about the slow super flex drafts because as you get late into the draft, in every slow draft, you have to consider all of the correlation elements and how you're going to put a bow on this draft. And it's easy to do in a fast draft when you are drafting that team. You're like, I took these guys at these rounds. I know what this build is. When I have 40 slow drafts going, some of them I pop into, I'm like, yeah, I do remember this build. I remember what I was doing here. I can think through it. A lot of the other ones, I'm like, who the fuck drafted the first 14 rounds of this team? They're the players I like, but I don't know what I was doing. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know what my next plan was. I go look at my last picks to try to figure it out. Like, oh, I took Kendre Miller last round. Did I have a plan going forward after that? Like when I added that additional running back, was I thinking I'd be continuing to hammer running back? Was it just because I was like, I'm going to click Kendre Miller and I'm going to move on. And I don't even want to think about the plan for this draft. And so I wind up rethinking the plan every time I open a new slow draft, and that's worse in the super flexes. So I'm coming down the finish line of a bunch of super flex drafts right now, and I'll probably finish a lot of them while I'm in Montana over the next week. I will be back as far as the content schedule and everything. I will be back next Wednesday. I'm trying to make Wednesday a consistent element. You guys have been showing up. I want to do some type of consistency, but I mean, that's the other thing that's so crazy about the views on the channel and how much you guys have supported this is I haven't done anything consistent. Even today, I'm finally doing Wednesday with a little bit of consistency, but I decided I would do 7 a.m. my time, 10 a.m. Eastern. I've been typically doing like noon Eastern, but it's because my kids have the day off for Juneteenth. Their last day of school is tomorrow. Then we're going on that vacation, but I wanted to get started early today and then get done early today because they're home. So I started before my youngest one even woke up. At any rate, not being very consistent with this stuff, but it will be somewhere in the 10 Eastern to noon Eastern Wednesday mornings time frame, trying also not to overlap with too much other good content that's out there. I know on Wednesdays you have Swolecast people have been talking a lot about, and I've overlapped with a little. So I might try to go a little earlier to miss that, but I think they move their time around a little bit if I've noticed. And I've done some Thursday mornings, but then I was overlapping with Lowell's, and we do ship chasing Thursdays. I do my Stealing Bananas recordings Tuesdays. Pete's got Best Ball Breakfast Mondays. I'm not going to go up against it. It's an incredible show that everybody's watching and should be. So for me, it's going to be Wednesdays and then potentially Fridays as a second stream during the week. If not, then maybe I'll just come live like on Saturday or on Sunday, which I've done a couple of the weekend streams. And those have been fun. Those have been, chill, relaxing weekend streams. But obviously over the summer, people are going to be out of town on weekends and things like that. So we'll see how the content comes together. It'll also matter if I have slow drafts to consistently do, because I'm doing this road trip to a state where I can't actually join anymore. I'm going to be, running out, but also like probably not rushing to go out of state again right away because, just did a long drive. I might take a little bit of a break as I work through my projections. I'll probably still do some Wednesday streams. Might start having some guests on, do some fast drafts. We'll see. But those are some things I'm thinking through. But I might go to like once a week at that, for a little bit of time. So anyway, this is the one, certainly once a week this week. This is the last one until next Wednesday. See you guys back here next Wednesday. But let's get into some picks because we haven't even made a pick yet. We've been talking about the ecosystem for basically the duration so far. It is a fun conversation. Bunch of super flexes. I'm on the clock in more than I was at the start. Jumping into this one, so I just took Kendre Miller. Pretty funny note there. So this one I did throw Aiden O'Connell in the top of the queue. He's got an ADP that would make him a must here at 1302. He's got a 149 ADP. I'm at pick 146. I am taking a lot of O'Connell in these super flex drafts. Talked a little bit about it, but he actually played pretty well down the stretch under Antonio Pierce, who was their interim head coach and then got the full-time head coach job. They go and sign Gardner Minshew, who I think is a very underrated backup quarterback, who's like a high-level backup quarterback who's competent. He was very good for the Colts last year. He was good for the players around him. I think people underrate what Minshew brings to the Vegas passing game because I think he brings floor. If O'Connell sucks, I think Minshew, is going to be fine. But O'Connell was good down the stretch, and I do think they're probably going to try to develop him because he finished the final 4 games, 8 touchdowns, no interceptions, relatively solid. Devontae Adams had a massive week 17 with O'Connell under center. They started to click some things, and then they extended the interim coach that, had moved to that quarterback, and those things started to click with. He's obviously Antonio Pierce, a defensive-minded guy, former NFL linebacker. But one of the very first things he did was step in and take play Aiden O'Connell, start him, bench Jimmy Garoppolo. That was like part of why he got the interim job was there was that internal strife with Josh McDaniels. There was disagreements. I think the locker room wanted to see O'Connell play, liked what he was doing in practice, and they went forward with that. And that was obviously liked by the locker room and is the play in this offseason. There's not been a lot of drama out of Vegas. Devontae Adams not talking about, being traded this offseason. So I think they do have an idea of what they want to do. And I think O'Connell's a part of that. Does that mean he starts week 1? I don't know. Does that mean he's starting when I have the buys on some of the teams that I'm taking him on? I don't know. But I do think he starts some, and you get him really cheap in these super flexes. So I grab him, especially when I have Devontae Adams or Brock Bowers. And I didn't think I did in this draft, and I don't, because this is one where I remember starring him, but saying it's not a great fit because I don't have the stack. I do have so I took Kendre Miller. He's a bring back, week 17 bring back on O'Connell. And I think that was part of it as well. It's like, well, I can start to build out a Vegas, New Orleans thing and maybe take like a late Michael Mayer, although this team already has 2 tight ends, or do something with Vegas later. Jacoby Myers is gone as well. I don't really know what I like in terms of late Raiders, but I mean, O'Connell is just objectively, I think, a good value in a super flex format at these prices, because the opportunity cost is much lower. Mayer, I guess I could do Trey Tucker. Michael Gallup. I probably won't stack him at all, but this is a team where I only have the 2 quarterbacks. Jalen Hurts and Bryce Young is my QB2. There's definitely some fragility there, and just having a quarterback that I think is going to make starts adds value to the build. The rest of the build, David Montgomery, Raheem Mostert, Kendre Miller. So I got a little bit of stability at running back in the earlier part of that. Montgomery and Mostert. Miller, one of my favorite mid-round running backs, as you guys know. It's not a deep running back room, but I can add kind of scratch off some flyers and wind up with a room that I'm okay with there. At receiver, it's A.J. Brown, Garrett Wilson. So I started with 2 studs. Jalen Waddle then I got in the 4th, and Malik Neighbors in the 5th. And then I got Deontay Johnson later after that. So this was a draft pick out of the 102. I take Hurts, 2-3 turn. I stack Hurts with A.J. Brown and get Garrett Wilson on the way back. 4-5 turn, I get Jalen Waddle and Malik Neighbors. And then I still get Kyle Pitts, and I grabbed Bryce Young. This is a team that's really fun. A lot of upside. The tight end room, like I said, still has Pitts, and I got Goddard to stack with Hurts. It's got the Eagles double. So basically, this is a pocket of the draft where the other part of the O'Connell pick is like, I feel really good about those 5 receivers. I got the 2 tight ends set, and the running back room isn't like deep enough, but the top running backs are Austin Eckler, Ezekiel Elliott, Nick Chubb. Then you get Ty Chandler, Marshawn Lloyd, Rico Dowdle, Jalen Wright. Those are all guys that I take a lot of. And they might all go before they come back. It comes back to me, but it's sort of a thing where it's like, how much opportunity cost am I giving up to take this pick here? It's pretty flat. I think I can throw a QB3 into this build. I'm going to take O'Connell. I also have Bucky Irving starred here. Some of you guys might have noticed that's because of the Bryce Young, Deontay Johnson. He would be the bring back. He's the guy I really want to add to this running back room. He's even cheaper than all those other names I mentioned. And I'll probably be looking, and I think he should be in that group, frankly. I'll probably be looking to take him at the next turn. And so I'm already locking in, an overdrafted running back at the next turn, basically, because the turn following that will be behind Irving's ADP. And I think he's severely undervalued. So I'm happy to take him in the late rounds, well above his ADP, frankly. So next turn's probably running back. And then this build is pretty sexy. If Aiden O'Connell does start, this build becomes really fun. We got a bunch of these super flexes. There's some other drafts, though, that I actually wanted to look at. I I did a thumbs down on this one because I think I didn't like it, but I don't think it's that bad when I looked at it the next time. Because I took 2 quarterbacks in that window where I'm kind of talking about not wanting to take quarterbacks, pick 69, pick 76 in best ball. In Superflex, Derek Carr, Daniel Jones. Oh, the one I want to show you guys that I put the note on is the one I put the laughing emoji because it just killed me. People like to complain about getting sniped. I got a good one for you guys for today. This is a best ball mania draft. I decided to go pretty extreme 0 quarterback out of the 8 hole. So I took Bijan Robinson, Chris Olave, Diggs, Zay Flowers in the next 3 rounds. I got the anchor running back, hit receiver hard. Dalton Kincaid, I get Jaden Reed and Rashee Rice coming back. And so I have 5 receivers through 7 with Dalton Kincaid and Bijan Robinson, and I just feel great about that. I end up taking Zamir White in the next round. He's a bring back on Olave. Just trying to get a little bit more exposure to him. He's a pretty athletic dude, and they're talking good about him in Vegas, and I just got done talking about kind of being higher on Vegas than the market probably. Got David Njoku in the next round. I think I was thinking through quarterback stacks. I was. And I was like, all right, well, this might be a Deshaun Watson team. I take Chase Brown in the next round. Watson winds up going in this draft at 147 to Dread C, which is, I believe, it's 16 picks ahead of his ADP at the time it was made. His ADP is 163. So that's one of the reasons I continue to push quarterback is, there's a few of those different types of things happened throughout this draft where I just didn't get the opportunities to pull the trigger at quarterback at the times that I wanted to. So I keep pushing it. I take Chase Brown, I take Dontavian Wicks, I take Rico Dowdle and Jalen Wright, keep building out running back. I didn't have any pieces that made a lot of sense at that point. I did have Bijan, and I think I was looking at Kirk Cousins, and he goes 1 pick before me in the 12th. Just, again, to get the QB1. I wasn't really that stressed about it, but I keep pushing it. So I take Marvin Mims and I take Wan'Dale Robinson in 14 and 15. And I have this plan now because I have Chris Olave in the second round. That Derek Carr is going to be my QB1. And then I'm realizing that I'm going to need to set up some other late stacks. So I take Marvin Mims and Wan'Dale Robinson, and I'm suddenly thinking, okay, Derek Carr, Bo Nix, Daniel Jones. I can get behind that. Everyone's really worried about Daniel Jones playing late, but I think he provides ceiling while he's the starter. He's a really good late round pick in terms of like what he's actually going to give you from a scoring perspective when he plays. Malik Neighbors is a really good prospect that should elevate this passing game a little bit. And if Daniel Jones, if they compete at all, if he actually plays through week 16 and 17, if there's, those injury guarantees are real and they might bench him, but say there's a world where they actually compete and he plays through the end of the year and he's good and plays, because like the thing about the injury guarantees as it relates to Russell Wilson is the certainty that the Bucs were going to move on from Wilson. I don't know that I'm as certain that that's what the Giants want to do with Daniel Jones. If he has a really good year this year, it'll be a second good year in 3 years. They extended him after the 2022 season. Last year was a bad year. But I mean, I don't think they were extending him to get rid of him 2 years later. So like if he's playing well, like they might like be like he's a quarterback, and he provides some upside. He's at least interesting if you're worried about that bench risk late in the year, like the Sam Howell. It's the Sam Howell thing from last year where Howell was good enough that a lot of my teams advanced largely because of these late 3 QB builds where Howell was a huge part of the advance rate. He was the one hitting the lineup so much and providing me some QB scoring. And then he got benched in the playoffs and those teams kind of faded off because like they were with like Kenny Pickett and Mac Jones. You do still need your other stacks to then hit in the playoffs if that player is not playing anymore. But Daniel Jones, I think, can be that player this year that's helpful for a 3 QB build if you have like a Derek Carr and a Bo Nix stacked up and they can somehow hit late. You still have to get the spike weeks from Derek Carr and Bo Nix, which are not likely, but I think Daniel Jones is a good pick, is what I'm saying. So I set all that up. I'm headed to round 16, 17, and 18 to take those 3, but I'm going to be able to do it in a way where I take them all ahead of ADP. I obviously understand there's risk here. I obviously understand this build's probably going to get blown up. But I take Wan'Dale Robinson at 15.08 at 176. And then the first player I need to take is Derek Carr, whose ADP was like 200 or something. He winds up going 1 pick ahead of me on the way back. Okay, I got sniped. That's a bummer. But I start to look at this guy's team. He doesn't have a Saint. He has 3 other quarterbacks already at that point, and they all have a week 12 bye. So this is his 4th quarterback in this build, all with a week 12 bye. He takes Carr 17 picks ahead of ADP, 201 ADP, takes him at 184. Obviously, those 17 picks are not that important in the late rounds. This is why I put the laughing emoji. It's whatever. I don't really care that much. But it is kind of hilarious that he had 3 QBs with a week 12 bye. If he's going to go to a 4 QB build, I would expect that he's going away from another week 12 bye. And then, so he has Josh Allen, Kirk Cousins, and Aaron Rodgers. And he has Rodgers with Breece Hall here. He has Kirk Cousins stacked with Drake London. He has Josh Allen stacked with Curtis Samuel. He has the Breece Hall bring back on the Allen thing. And he has on the Cousins pick. No, he doesn't have a Washington bring back on Cousins, but on Rodgers. Oh, yeah. So Rodgers and Allen are bringbacks of each other. So he has 3 guys stacked. 2 of them have bringbacks. All 3 of his QBs are stacked, and 2 of them do have bringbacks. So I think he is clearly sort of building a certain type of way. And then he takes Carr, who he does not have stacked anywhere. He does have Jacoby Myers, so there's that, that bring back. But in terms of taking a 4th QB way ahead of ADP to match the other 3 week 12 buys, I would have at least expected to see him stacked, Derek Carr, and he doesn't have him stacked either. And again, the other 3 QBs are stacked. And then I go look and I'm like, did I do something to this guy? Because now it feels a little personal. If you look at my build in the draft room, I'm one spot behind you. You can see that it clearly lists the number of QBs, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends that have been taken. And I'm at QB 0 in round 16. It's not hard to figure out what I'm trying to get to fall to me at that point. If you go look at my roster, what I've set up, what I'm going for. So like, yeah, I mean, most of the time I'm like, people are being self-important and they're not actually targeting you when they snipe somebody or what have you. They're worried about their own team. They have no idea that you wanted that player. But I go back and I look through and I realize this guy took Josh Allen in the 3rd round and I took Dalton Kincaid in the 5th round, one pick before him. And I just wonder if he really wanted to stack Josh Allen with Dalton Kincaid in the 5th and was seeing Dalton Kincaid fall, and I took him there. But what's weird about that is, I mean, at least in my opinion, is Dalton Kincaid was 5.1 picks behind ADP when I took him. It's not like I was sniping him. And it's also like, yeah, I mean, he wasn't stacked, but he's an elite tight end in the 5th round. That's a ADP value. But I do think it's possible, at least, that this guy was annoyed that I took Kincaid there. That's really the only pick that where like our two drafts interacted. He was annoyed that he took the Kincaid pick there. Maybe that, you know, he didn't realize that he was stacking up his week 12s and then he felt like this team was just dead and decided he'd go out in a blaze of glory and take Derek Carr just to you know, to spite me. I don't know if that's the intent there, but what I mean, I can't imagine this was a timeout. It couldn't have been because he's 17 picks ahead of ADP. I can't imagine it was a star method, you know, issue with a timeout either because there's no stack. Why would he have Derek Carr at the top of his queue? And it's a star method thing. I don't really like, he intentionally made this pick knowing it's another week 12 bye. Maybe he was just being funny. He's like, man, I'm so stupid. I drafted all these week 12 buys. I'm going to take another week 12 bye. Whatever it was, this pick makes 0 sense within the context of his team. And I know like people get so mad about the snipes and stuff. I'm just laughing about it. I took Bo Nix instead. I'm going to try to get Daniel Jones. Maybe I won't get him. Maybe I'll wind up taking Justin Fields on this build. It's a pretty hilarious, you know, slow draft outcome. But that is a team that I thought was fun. I wanted to share. If I could have got those exact 3 QBs, the reason that risk was worth it, I mean, this build would have been really fun. It's a Bijan, Zamir White, Chase Brown, Rico Dowdle, Jalen Wright. It's only 5 running backs, but those are pretty strong. Obviously, Bijan is the anchor. Olave, Diggs, Zay Flowers, Jaden Reed, Rashee Rice, Dontavian Wicks, Marvin Mims, Wan'Dale Robinson, and those last 2 would have been stacked. Kincaid and Njoku. A late round build. I haven't done a lot of these like really late 3 QB builds, but if you can structure it right and get it to fall to you, it's also an instructive draft I wanted to talk about where it's, you know, I basically burned that entry. I don't think it's going to be good enough. I don't think it's going to have enough at QB to really justify. I'm going to take 3 QBs one way or another, even if I have to take Aiden O'Connell, but I don't think it's going to get there. And yet you could see how that type of build could be an interesting one. All right, I'm going to go to the chat for a bit. I'm here for 3 hours, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. We're an hour in, and I mean, we're pacing for another 4-hour stream. Draft Trey Benson, you coward. I'm not going to go into the Benson conversation. This is a reference to the ship chasing discussion this morning, which I already referenced. We talked about Trey Benson a lot in the ship chasing channel this morning. I gave a lot of thoughts for those of you who are ship chasing members and are interested in some Trey Benson conversation. Go read through that. Good afternoon from Portugal. What is up, TJ? Living vicariously through these shows as my slows dry up. Hope you're enjoying Portugal. Sounds like your slows dry up the way that you said that maybe you're visiting Portugal. If you live there, congrats to you for living there. Sounds amazing. GM guys, we got a Jalen Brooks in the chat. Oh wait, that was last time. Love the live streams. Keep killing it. Love you guys as well. Grant here notes another thing in the tools overlays conversation. There's a difference between tools overlays and automated real-time assistance. Sidekick uses automated processes, which breaks Underdog's terms of service. Oh, I didn't read that second sentence. I thought it was going to say that the real-time assistance in poker is like, you know, different than just different than just listing information. I think the idea of just listing information is super helpful. Yeah, I don't know about the stuff with the terms of service. Grant also says player takes aren't currently solved. Roster construction, positional draft allocation, stacking correlation, bye weeks can all be largely solved and solved soon. No, because all of that is relevant to the player takes are relevant to all of this. Again, I already did the whole rant, and I was frankly ruder about it than I meant to be, but I don't believe that the ways that those interrelate. I talked to the Jahan Dotson example. The ways that those interrelate with player takes is you can't disentangle that. And yes, those things can be all I think you can do is what the sidekick is intending to do. And to be clear, like I'm not getting anything out of the sidekick. Pat developed this with his leg up team on his own. I just heard about it when it was done. I do ship chasing with Pat, and he's a friend, but this is not something that I'm kind of learning about all this as you guys are. I'm not like, defending from a specific bias other than obviously being supportive of Pat. I acknowledge that I'm his buddy, but my opinion on it, as I saw that the conversation is what I was sharing earlier, is that the stuff that it's trying to do, because a lot of my feedback to Pat was like, these are the reasons I wouldn't use this, like, and then a lot of his feedback to me was like, that's why we called it the sidekick. It's really intended to be a sidekick. It's not intended to draft for you. Because a lot of it was like, I think these are issues. Like I don't think all this stuff is solvable. Like like helping you think through correlations so you don't have to spend the time to do it on your own doesn't seem like an issue to me. Like I'm going to spend the time to think through correlation one way or another. If I have these, these matchups on screen that you guys see right now from Brick's Draft Caddy, is that really that different than me? Like what I would do is just have a Google spreadsheet over here that has all the matchups. And then I would just have to go look at them and waste more time and do fewer drafts. Like I just have it there for reference. It doesn't play into, there's the guide me thing on the Draft Caddy. And I've clicked that before. I've done what it said twice. It's interesting to see what the automation thing is telling me it thinks to do, but these things are not like, they're not going to just be right because you can, roster construction, positional draft allocation. I don't even think that stuff can largely be solved. I don't. I think that's a mistake in the analysis, like the positional draft allocation, that the conversations I see around that are all based on the past seasons. And I always get frustrated because I'm like, if you do any research on fantasy football and on the NFL, like early on when I was at RotoViz, I did like a 20-year, 30-year research thing to talk through how the NFL evolves and goes through eras. And I know people inherently are like, oh, who cares about what happened in the 90s? We know that that's a different era. But when you do that type of research, and I've intimately done it, and I would encourage anyone else to do it, you will see how, like, just in the last 20 years, in the 2004, 20 years ago, the average scoring of the top 10 tight ends or something like that, however you want to frame, when I say something like that, however you want to frame tight end scoring, you could say top 10 fantasy tight ends. You could say, other ways of looking at it, was way lower than it even was by 2014. And then I think it peaked and then kind of came back down. I haven't really updated that stuff to 2024, but you see how tight end just in the last 20 years became a position that mattered. Another thing that you see over time is that prior to the 2000s, there was no such thing as a receiving back. Didn't exist. Fullbacks caught a ton of passes. Larry Centers caught 100 balls in like 2001. And then you started it in the 2000s with like Kevin Falk with the Patriots. Bill Belichick, probably one of the first coaches that did it. And then certainly Sean Payton, Reggie Bush, Darren Sproles. And then you started seeing a lot of copycats to that. Theo Riddick. A lot of those roles existed, but they weren't like dynamic players. And we went back to the uber back because it became too obvious that we're playing the passing down backs and we're going to throw. And so we want a back that can stay on the field on all 3 downs. And the substitution rules in the NFL and the way that defenses were then allowed to match, which I don't think was always the case. And so teams would always try to catch defenders running off the field and get the 12 men on the field penalties. The quarterbacks would get ready and snap and quick snap, and you don't see that as much anymore. If the offense substitute, the defense has to be allowed to match. Once that happened, offenses didn't want to have to substitute, so the defenses couldn't match, and so we went to the uber back. We went to the guys that could do everything, and those guys were valuable, and suddenly we went away from running back by committees and these specialized roles. Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson. All of these little tweaks change everything about fantasy football. When the tight end position gets more important and they can suddenly, in the last 5 or 7 years, we've broken the tight end receiving yardage record, the receptions record, and then broken them again multiple times over. Even the Gronks and the Jimmy Grahams weren't doing what Kittle has done in certain seasons and Kelsey has done in certain seasons. And those guys were smashing what Tony Gonzalez and Antonio Gates did. That changes the positional draft allocation conversation. The running back thing, how it becomes an uber back thing, changed the way you should have played running back in 2018, 2019, 2020. And then all the injuries that we've had in the ensuing running back classes, so that right now in 2024, where we sit, we don't have a whole lot of prime running backs that are uber backs. We don't have prime Le'Veon Bell. We don't have prime Todd Gurley. Our RB1 is 29, and he was the uber back from freaking 5 years ago. But we love that he's still productive for the 49ers. We're hoping Breece Hall can be that guy if his quarterback can stay healthy. And now that he's back from a major knee injury he went through, we're hoping Bijan Robinson comes back from a bad coaching staff and is that guy. But there's only like 3 people that anyone even wants to bet on this stuff. Jonathan Taylor used to be a first overall pick for a season, but nobody thinks he's good enough anymore after he had some injuries. And the whole rest of those classes busted, right? Like Cam Akers got hurt, J.K. Dobbins got hurt, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, was just a first-round bust. Najee Harris was a first-round bust. These guys go way later in drafts now. We don't have the superstar running back. So you want to go look at positional draft allocation trends, fine. ADP has changed, and the fucking positions have changed. The players have changed. So the answers in 2024 are not the same as the answers in the past. There's so many people who talk through this eloquently. I know this is something I've talked with Eric Beimfor about a lot. I know Leone talks about this a lot when he actually breaks down the past stuff, that you have you're looking at one data point. It's like 1 week of DFS every year. This is the thing that won this year. It does not, even 5 samples, 5 seasons of BBM or 10 samples. And that's the other issue is like in DFS, we get 17 in a particular season. And so then when the trends of the NFL change, the other point I would talk about over the long haul is the NFL changing. Passing ADOTs coming down, completion percentages going up because defenses are playing cover 2 shells, which has brought scoring down. It changes everything, man. It changes everything. The way that we analyze these players, the way we analyze fantasy football. Like, if you think this stuff is solved, you're not being holistic enough in the way that you think about fantasy football. This is where I think my edge is. I do study the game and understand all. That's what I write about in the newsletter. This is where my approaches are every year. I still care a lot about the trends from past seasons. I care about the player development stuff. I care about where the offenses are going and all of those things. But if you're not thinking through the fact that the NFL has eras and is constantly evolving, one of the big things I've talked about in my content a ton over the last decade is after 2014, or in the offseason of 2014, after 2013, after the Legion of Boom won the Super Bowl in the 2013 season, Dean Blandino was the executive, referee official. You can still find, or I know maybe I tried to re-find it. You can't find it anymore, but at a time while I was doing content, I think in like 2019 or something, I had a link to the official announcement from 2014. Like I think you can still probably find it online, where they talk about, greater enforcement of illegal contact and defensive holding, and they're going to go forward with basically making it so that receivers are able to get off the line and run freely in the secondary, which is back then in 2015, 2016, all of the past data told you weight was a really big marker for wide receiver production. And it was because you had to be able to fight through hand battles at the line of scrimmage. You had to be able to use your physicality in your route to win and gain separation. Today's NFL doesn't even matter. And for a bunch of years when I was writing about it, I was like, basically predicting we're going to start seeing lighter receivers be a lot more productive in the NFL. It's exactly what we've seen. And people didn't want to buy it for the first couple years because it was like, well, this is an outlier. This is the first lighter receiver to do anything productive. So we can't bet on the next light receiver to do anything productive. Now, at a certain point, when you're trying to run Tutu Atwell out there and he's 150 pounds, I do still think it's a problem. And in a lot of my content, I've gone back to weight being interesting. I mean, because we've even gone to really light running backs because a lot of the impact of that and lighter receivers is defenses got lighter, linebackers are lighter, right? And so then running backs got lighter because they weren't having to fight off tackles from 250-pound linebackers anymore. Linebackers are 220 now. And so now, running backs can be 200. They don't have to be 220 or 230. And that it adds speed, right? The offsetting thing is if you're lighter, then the ways that a lighter player wins, speed and agility, suddenly matter way more because weight is no longer a disqualifying factor. Well, now, I mean, the lighter and more agile receiver is actually better than the heavier receiver, like a Kelvin Benjamin, who could succeed at least for his early career without, using his body and his physicality, but had no agility. That guy's just a dinosaur in 2024 because there's just a lighter receiver who's going to outmaneuver him and can't get jammed. The defensive, holding illegal contact can't happen. So obviously Justin Jefferson's going to run laps around that guy, a lighter receiver, right? I mean, Jefferson's not the best example, but whatever. The point is the NFL is constantly evolving every year. It's not like we've plateaued. The 2020 was a massive scoring season, and by 2022, defenses had evolved and scheme had evolved so much that scoring was way down, and it stayed down last year, and that impacted a ton of stuff about how you should have played fantasy football and how you won. And that's in addition to the trends within positions that I was talking about, like how running back at the top isn't strong because of the last half decade of draft classes. It also gets to the point I was making about tight end and how I believe that the top 7 profiles this year are stronger tight end profiles than we've ever had in fantasy football. Those are the kinds of takes that change everything about positional draft allocation. I guarantee you cannot devise something that is going to have the opinion that I just had, that the top 7 tight ends are stronger for 2024 than they've ever been. The people that are too narrow in the way that they look back at things don't see those changes. And that's an opportunity. That's an edge. That's something that I exploit. Again, that's where I think my edge is at. That's why I get so passionate about this. That's how I win with my own research and my own analysis and the stuff that I write up. You want to know how I pick players better than other people? If I get asked that question a lot, it's because of the types of stuff that you think are going to be solvable. Like, I want this to be solvable. I would love to see how positional draft allocation for a future season is solvable based on past data. I'd love to see it. Love to see it. I'd welcome it. Again, that sounds so cocky. It's more cocky than I am with the way that I actually think about my own ability to analyze stuff. Usually you guys hear me be humble about it, and it's not false humility. I don't think I know everything, but I do think this is a somewhat, and I'm not trying to attack you, Grant. I appreciate the opinion and the conversation, but I think this is a somewhat ludicrous position that I keep seeing repeatedly. Like, I'm missing something. And I want to keep being, I'll tell this to anyone. I'll tell this to somebody who creates content in the industry that knows a lot more than I do, that I disagree with them heavily on this. I feel strongly that this stuff is not as solvable as people believe it is. I think you can lean toward, the stacking and correlation stuff. Yeah, I can, you can tell me that on this team, I have this quarterback and this player stacks with him and correlates based on the schedule. That's the part of it that okay, yeah, I mean, that is solved. Again, I can just put that in a spreadsheet if I can't have it on my screen and I'll look at it. As far as how positional draft allocation and all of that stuff evolves year over year, I think it's ludicrous. I think it's ludicrous that can be solved. It's different every season. The ways to win are different every season. Last year, I was arguing to attack running backs in the dead zone based on the landscape after being the guy who invented the dead zone, right? Or first wrote about it and whatever. I always make a point to emphasize that the dead zone is really just an extension of Sean Siegel's zero RB strategies. It basically was an evolution of how zero RB became modified hero, modified zero RB, hero RB, anchor RB. You could still take the running backs in the elite rounds when the Uber running backs came. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey was undeniable. Todd Gurley was undeniable in his prime. But the real window was that dead zone where you needed to be attacking wide receiver depth and not running backs. And now everyone knows that. It's all about wide receiver depth. I've been writing about it for years and years. That's what the whole point of the dead zone stuff was. But we got to a point with the evolution of it all that I was last year arguing you have to take running backs in the dead zone, and seeing other people write about the dead zone, and in my opinion, not writing about it very effectively, not very forward thinking, and not very intelligently. And it created opportunity. And my team's fucking smashed last year, guys. Like, I'm not just making this up. And the guys that subscribe to my newsletter smashed. It's just the reality. I got a ton of feedback that a lot of people won their leagues. I got the one guy who was in Signals Gold. He's in 4 leagues. One of them's an 18-man league or something like that. He won the championship in all 4 leagues. I mean, that's an outlier example. But I mean, if you're in 4 leagues and you win one of your leagues in a given year, that's fantastic, right? That's, he's in 4 home leagues in addition to his other stuff. But the point is, I thought it was exploitable last year. The overemphasis on past trends was exploitable last year because you had to understand why those trends existed in the past and what the actual landscape was presenting you in 2023 and what that meant. And the big thing that I hammered was you had to go wide receiver so that you could free up to take those running backs in the dead zone. And even though Christian McCaffrey fucking smashed as a first round pick, what I described was right, basically. Like, if you needed to be going wide receiver and hitting Breece Hall and Travis Etienne, because the 2v2 of McCaffrey in the first round, I mean, some of my best ball teams were McCaffrey teams. They got like fractions of a point away. I had 2 McCaffrey teams, one with Pete Overzet, that were within like 2 points of getting to the BBM final, and they were McCaffrey teams. So this is not true across the board. Obviously, McCaffrey was a great pick, especially in best ball where you couldn't do other things. Like stability at running back is so valuable in best ball. But in season-long leagues, they were not McCaffrey teams that I finished top 30 with 3 different teams with 3 different sets of co-managers. One was Silva, one was Sean Siegel, and one with the ship-chasing guys. Top 30 in either the FFPC main event or the NFC prime time. I had 3 different teams finish that high. One as high as 7th, another I think was 10th was Silva in FFPC, and they were all very similar builds. They had Breece Hall, they had ETN, and they had wide receiver starts. They did not have McCaffrey. And even though McCaffrey was a smash, because it came to this 2v2 of, well, if you took McCaffrey, you're probably taking a receiver in the dead zone, which used to be the answer based on past trends. And that didn't win for you. And if you took McCaffrey and you took ETN and Breece, you probably were fine. But not a lot of people did that because the data had shown that you can't hit 3 running backs early. And you probably still were really lacking for wide receiver firepower. You needed those early receivers to justify the dead zone running backs, which none of that was in the past trends. That's not something that you could have said, that's a winner. Breece Hall and Travis Etienne in rounds 4 and 5, I'm going to target that. That's not based on, what I'm looking at in the data. That was understanding the context of fantasy football and the evolution of the hobby and why these things existed in the past data and what's going to happen next. And again, I sound way cockier this morning than I intend to. It all comes back to, I think there's way too much confidence and fear about what these draft caddies and sidekicks and these things can actually provide a drafter. I don't think it's going to fix all of that for a bad drafter. And if you're following it blindly, I don't think you're going to build perfect teams or anything. I mean, again, Pat openly acknowledged this when they set out to build the thing. And when I was giving him feedback, man, I'm very blunt with my feedback. He was like, yeah, that's why it's called a sidekick. Like, it's a helper. It's not going to make the decision for you. It can't. You have to think through it. Man, been some good rants this morning. And hopefully valuable outside the conversation of the layover and the tools that are available. Hopefully informative and instructive for how you think about fantasy football and how you build, because this is stuff that, again, I'm passionate about. I feel like is the game. It's hard to be perfect with your player takes. Everything's relative to cost, but you find pockets of value based on this type of stuff. That's where I'm at with the elite tight ends this year. The fact that I can get Pitts and Kittle as cheap as they are, that some people want to say that they don't even count as elite tight ends. Shout out our buddy Hayden Winks. We talked about this on the last show based on his definition, which is ADP related. And I understand from an analyst perspective, it makes sense. But I'm not looking at it from that perspective, from trying to like analyze past data. I'm looking at it from the perspective of where are there value opportunities in the unique, where are we moving in the unique 2024 landscape that creates value opportunities? And my argument is we have so many good tight end profiles that there's a saturation issue. Not everyone in a 12-team draft is going to be targeting tight ends early. There used to be a bidding war for some of these even questionable profiles. I talked to Leone about this a ton. We talked through about because Kyle Pitts in his second season was like a second-round pick, and at the time Leone thought it was too high, and I was really in on it. And so it's an extension of that conversation in some ways 2 years later as we recoup it. But a big part of the Pitts argument that second season was, and I wrote about this. You can go back to my newsletter and you can review it. I went and reviewed it. That there were a big three that year: Travis Kelce, Kyle Pitts, Mark Andrews. The next group was George Kittle and Darren Waller. And I had both of those guys, and I wrote about it in my tight end tiers that year. I went back and looked at it as not being set up to have a ceiling season. For Kittle, it was because it was the Trey Lance year, and so the volume and the target competition was an issue. For Waller, I believe it was because he had a huge lack of target competition the year prior. I didn't reference it in that tiers piece that I went back and read, but I had referenced it in prior writings about Waller. And so I was clearly alluding to stuff that I had written that offseason when I was like, these guys are not set up for their elite seasons. I don't remember the specifics around Waller. I think he had more target competition coming in. I'm not sure if that's the year they brought in Devontae Adams. But anyway, I had it as one of those big three was going to be a massive difference maker. And I wrote that. I actually had Kelce in his own tier, and then I had Pitts and Andrews, but I was like, these are the only guys that can actually contend with Kelce in my view. And so Pitts as this breakout year 2 profile that had 1,000 yards as a turning 21-year-old rookie was a part of that. That was not, in my opinion, exuberance. It was excitement, certainly, but it was also a lack of viable alternatives. So the other thing that I do in my tiers is I have a big tier break thing where I say, this is where it really falls off a cliff. And I have one of those or two of those within a position. And my point with the Kittle Waller thing is after the tight end 5 last year, I had a big tier break. And I said, everyone else sucks. My tight end 6 was like Dalton Schultz. And I said, there was basically only 5 tight ends that mattered. And really 2 of them I didn't like drafting. They were not, I was like, I don't like them as consolation prizes. They are consolation prizes. I can't remember the exact terminology I used, but I mean, I can even look that piece up. I'm trying to tight end tiers 2022. It doesn't even matter. Oh yeah, I found it really quickly because I just looked at it and it was saved in my cookies or whatever. Tight ends, targets, and fade, right? Tier 1A, Travis Kelce. Still the clear top tight end to me, whatever. Tier 1B, Pitts and Andrews. And I end up putting Pitts ahead of Andrews. I talked through how I actually did that while writing this piece. And actually, while writing this, I just decided to make that change. I'd have Pitts higher. He was going a little bit lower at the point of this. I was one of the leaders on Pitts, being overly aggressive on him and maybe wrong about it. But the point I was making is that it's incredibly shallow, especially here. I write about Waller and Kittle, and I say, I view them as consolation prizes relative to the big three. Both Waller and Kittle can prove me wrong in contingency-related ways. I just didn't think it was, there are factors that have 2022 as a season that doesn't seem like a great one to be expecting a peak year from either. And then I did a big tier break. And so my point is, part of the reason we pushed Pitts up so high that year was because it was so clear that the position was weak in elite profiles. And there were, if Kelce did fall off, which people were already concerned about him, I was writing about his fall off. People have been wishing on Kelce's downfall for years. That fall off could still come. There's real risk in his profile. But I talked about how he had a midseason stinger. You guys who are following me then remember this, that he was not as good down the stretch because of a stinger that he had midseason, but then he was good in the playoffs. And I was indicating, and to me, that indicated that he maybe didn't fall off. That fall off could still come. There's real risk in his profile. But even in a down regular season, he was a stud. Whatever. I don't know why I'm reading my 2022 analysis for you guys right now. But the point, what ended up happening is Kelce went on to win the position by over 100 points. That's so it was the argument was it's so thin at the top that someone's going to distance and they're going to be elite. And it was Kelce. Pitts and Andrews both busted. I thought it could have been 2 or 3 guys who distanced. It wasn't Kittle, even though, Lance wasn't even the big player. It was, and Kittle had a decent year, and it wasn't Waller, and the rest of the depth of the position didn't matter, right? But the way that we analyze elite tight end and those things is relative to that. So like one of the things that Hayden said in our conversation was talking about not wanting to change things backward looking just to fit a narrative. And I totally respect that as an analyst. The point that I was like, I kind of took issue with that because I was trying to point out prior to 2024 that I believe that this group of elite tight end profiles is deeper, right? And I don't think I'm trying to look differently at the past either, because I've had analysis every year about this. It's an important factor of draft building, and every year elite tight ends have been known to be a very important thing since the Gronk and Jimmy Graham breakouts. That typically the real ceiling from the position comes from the guys that we know are great at the position. And so, I mean, that actually, I think, goes back to like Antonio Gates when he had multiple great years in a row and was like a really good win rate type player. If you're taking Antonio Gates early in your home leagues back in, 2009 or whatever. But going into this year, I will have tiers that will look very different than what I just showed you. The big tier break will come after 7 tight ends. And they're all very strong profiles. I won't be talking about consolation prizes. I think Kittle is arbitrage Laporta. Kittle's the tight end 7. Laporta's the tight end 1. I think Kittle is a known elite efficiency talent who people don't want to draft as high because of target share concerns. And I think that's part of Laporta's concern. He's a huge hit as a rookie, and I think he's got a high floor to go on and be a really good tight end. But in terms of being the tight end 1 at the end of the year and scoring, he has some issues with Amon-Ra St. Brown, and then also a potential Jameson Williams breakout, not to mention how much they throw to the backs, and that I think Jahmyr Gibbs is going to catch more passes in year 2. That's a huge part of his profile. And they're going to still throw to guys like Khalif Raymond and stuff. Like they threw to Josh Reynolds last year and Raymond a little bit because they do that. And so I do think like Laporta is going to be very, very good, but I don't think he can go bananas in targets the way that like Kelsey has in his prime years, where he's like the main guy in his passing game. And that's the same thing I think that holds Laporta in the 3rd round, is a lack of true ceiling, the way that like I argued that Pitts had that year 2 years ago, because Pitts was so clearly the top guy in his passing. That was going into year 2, and you had a rookie year, Drake London, coming in. But Pitts is going into year 2 and coming off a 1,000-yard season. And it was like, well, what if Drake London's not even good? I mean, at worst, Pitts is one of the top 2 guys in his passing game. It's a little bit like my excitement for McBride going into this year, where he's bringing Marvin Harrison in. He's still clearly a top 2 target in the passing game. And we don't even know that Marvin Harrison's going to be as good as people think. But even if he is, a top 2 target in the passing game is great. That was the excitement for Pitts going into year 2 and why he pushed up into the 2nd round. You can't make that he's a clear top 2 without a 3rd weapon argument for Laporta. And I think that's what holds Laporta in round 3 instead of him going up into round 2 as this year 2 breakout. And that same thing that's holding Laporta down a little bit is the same thing that's pushing Kittle down. My point being, even at the bottom of those top 7 tight ends, I mean, I can make a case that Kittle should be closer ranked to Laporta. We know that Kittle's good. It's the same issue. It's target volume. Now, maybe Laporta has a clearer path to being the number 2, whereas Kittle's maybe the more number 3, but there's no reason Kittle can't be ahead of either Ayuk or Debo in volume this year. He's a really good player. He and Purdy have a strong connection. Anyway, the way that you analyze the tight end position this year is going to be different than everything that you can look at in past data, because the profiles going into the season and how that plays out are different. That's different for every position every year. Because again, I talked through the running back position. We haven't had a lot of hits at that position over multiple years, and that's led to a scarcity of elite talents at the top. And how has that influenced drafting in an era where drafters are also then becoming more willing? We're finally into the 0 RB acceptance phase, where Sean originally wrote about it in 2013. And for like 8 years after that, until like 2021, everyone was just like, this is a bad, like every offseason you had a bunch of analysts like, you can't do 0 RB. This is the year that it doesn't work. And then we were fine. Like the last 3 years, really, we finally got to the acceptance phase of zero RB, and then it's really heavily those principles and the running back dead zone, which overlaps, which is, again, I've already passed the credit along to Sean's original work on the dead zone stuff, but that is an overlapping strategy, and that stuff has finally influenced ADP heavily, and especially on Underdog over the last 3-4 years, which is awesome because it creates a new challenge for an analyst. And it's fun to talk through this stuff. But it's like the way that the market is evolving at a time where running back is weak has led to a change in the ways that that the receivers are approached, and it's being heavily emphasized for multiple reasons: the lack of running back talent and the improvement of understanding of the principles of zero RB and elite receiver depth and all of that stuff. And so we've gone way. I mean, those are the reasons, in my opinion, a multi-year, multifaceted thing that is impacting ADP in the market. That's why wide receivers going as heavy as it is. What data do we have to optimize, the wide receiver stuff? I still get asked all the time, don't you think it's probably best to just take a bunch of running backs, really? Because, look at the prices on them. And I'm like, man, I wouldn't. Like, that's not in the cards for me, because of all of the concerns you have about actually building adequate wide receiver firepower when they're going that high. If you try to push it back, like, there's still the reality that a lot of the running back, so the realities of the different positions play into this, that a lot of running back production can come from late in a way that a lot of receiver production can't. The guy who won the regular season title, $1 million title in Best Ball Mania last year, I talk about his team all the time. It had Raheem Mostert and Kyron Williams. It was a zero RB team. He got his running back production from late. He got his receiver production from early. He scored more points than any other BBM team over a large sample, not just spike weeks, but over the whole season. You can't get Raheem Mostert and Kyron Williams outcomes as consistently late at receiver. Obviously, Puka Nacua is the funny counterexample. You could get it last year. Puka Nacua was like the highest upside late round hit. Most late round, like, high win rate players aren't even that impactful, but they're high win rate because they were just like good. Like Zay Jones the year prior ended up having a really high win rate, but like he didn't even have that great of a season, statistically speaking. It's not like he did what Puka did, but because like there's no good receivers late, the one that has 800 yards is, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, I'm I'm still so far back in the chat that this question is still there. The Ben, how'd you get so smart and continue to grow? Which I'm only sharing because Brian Ford responded, brain development does not stunt physical growth. That's a really good reply to that question. Man, I'm so far behind on the chat. I would have loved to see your guys' thoughts on the sidekick and all of that stuff. Like Marshall says, one thing that it helps with is portfolio diversification. Completely agree with that. It gets me on players that I wasn't otherwise, considering. And I'm like, yeah, this is the draft where I need to take that guy. And I mean, that's probably an edge. That's helpful for me. Like it you can optimize for correlation a little bit in those types of things, but I'm still going to override it with like the Jahan Dotson example, where I don't think it's even the correlation is even worth drafting a player that I think is so overvalued. Yeah, historical anomalies. This is great. Love this. There have been automated tools for redraft, like the Football Guys Draft Dominator for many years has not ruined the game. Draft Sharks has had a similar, this type of dynamic rankings list has existed for like a decade, and it hasn't ruined anything because it's not solvable. Like, it's not solvable in that way. In terms of, yeah, he goes to add best ball is more of a portfolio strategy game with which these tools help. And that's the part of it I agree with. It helps your portfolio management over a ton of drafts and how you're strategizing your, exposures, and probably within individual drafts, how you correlate them. And it will make, I said this earlier, like it's not that it's not going to have any effect. It will make, 8 drafters in a given room, if they're all using these tools, will build better teams than, some rooms where you get 8 drafters are bad and only 4 are building, smartly correlated teams. You'll get 4 more that are now building smartly correlated teams and doing intelligent stuff. I don't even know if that's bad for the landscape, man. I just showed that Derek Carr thing. I wish that guy was using Sidekick. I guarantee it would have told him to not take his 4th week 12 bye week quarterback unstacked. Like, I would have got Derek Carr in this team. It's not that bad to have people in their own lane correlating their teams and being a little bit more predictable about what they're going to do. It's actually really reminiscent of the way that Sean McVay talks about NFL defenses in the Play Caller series last summer that that podcast series from The Athletic that was so damn good. It's worth going back and listening to this year if you haven't ever heard it. It's like a 5-episode special. They get quotes from a ton of the young NFL coaches that are driving the innovative changes in scheme. You'll learn so much about the game. One of McVay's points is that he wants defenses to play things correctly because then they know how to approach it. They know how to attack it. They know if cover 2 and everybody, they know the rules. They know what the safeties are supposed to do. They can devise cover 2 beaters. If we run this route through this guy's zone, he has to track it. Now this linebacker has to carry the seam route. And we don't think their linebacker is good enough to do that. So that's how we want to attack. Well, that's the way that NFL defenses aren't doing it anymore. They are refusing to play by the rules. They're playing highly variable, disguising coverages. They're running guys all over the place. They might disguise and roll into one coverage. They might disguise and roll into a version of that where one guy is just running loose, like leaving one player to jump another route. You see a lot of the interceptions these days are DBs whose eyes are in the backfield and they see that the quarterback sees a guy who's one on his route in one-on-one coverage. Like the one I'm thinking of, and I don't know who the player is, but it was an outside cornerback on the right side of the field. And he's, backpedaling, but looking into the backfield. And he kind of just lets his receiver go. He must know he has safety help because there's a crosser coming from the other side. And that guy immediately wins on his inside release on like the linebacker or whatever. And he's so wide open. But this DB on the far side of the field, that's the outside DB that in all past defenses has to stay with his man or has some type of rule or something. He feels that he can just come off of his guy and undercut this crosser and basically leave his guy running downfield, which would be a problem if he wasn't watching the quarterback's eyes and didn't anticipate that the quarterback sees that he has a winner and he's about to throw that underneath crosser. But the DB guarding someone else leaves and beats him to the spot. I believe it was Marcus Peters who did this. And picks off the pass. And you watch the replay and they're going, oh, this is a great read and this and that. But like, you're like, how do you play quarterback on that play? Right? Like you have to identify, what your routes are, but you have to identify the guy that's open and all the defensive players that are all moving in space in like 2 seconds and get the ball out before you get hit. And the one thing you expect on this side of the field is that this receiver that is running a vertical route is going to keep the cornerback with him in all likelihood, especially if you see that cornerback start to drop. Like it could be a cover 2 where the cornerback just stays underneath, but also if you read man coverage and the linebacker's following this guy across the field and you're like, okay, I got man coverage. I got a guy who won on his route to the inside. I got to look at that player to throw to him now. And if I don't see this other guy creeping in my peripheral, like the issue is that he's running into space where another receiver vacated, but that defender was like, I'm not going to vacate. I'm going to stick around and I'm going to go undercut this other route because I see the quarterback sees that he has a winner on the route. The quarterback makes the right decision on the play. I got a guy wide open across the middle. He's probably got yak ability because the receiver on that other side of the field should be clearing out the defender. That's the way football was played for the last 20 years. And that's not the way defenses are playing anymore. Anyway, that tangent was to say that the ways that defenses are played now that makes it a lot harder is actually kind of how draft lobbies are now when people decide they want a 4th quarterback with a week 12 bye and they take Derek Carr in the line. Like I would actually like you to just play your draft the correct way and then I can get Derek Carr, right? Like, I mean, it's not going to be the only beneficial element, but like, because it will make it harder in some to have a lot of people improving their drafting. I do believe it will make it harder. But there are ways that it makes it easier. There are ways that the predictability, like people have talked about that a ton this year, where you can push the pocket passers when you're in these badge rooms because people understand, like they're not going to take Tua unstacked. So you can push Tua. Me and Sean did it yesterday in a fast draft. It's one of the upcoming Stealing Bananas episodes. We had Tua right at cost on a Waddle Achane team, I think it was, or no, Waddle Mostert. 2 Dolphins already wanted Tua. and it was like the 5th pick of the round. So we were going to have to push him 7 picks down and 7 picks back, or 4th pick of the round. I think we had him right at ADP. We ended up pushing him, and he comes all the way back, and we get him 17 picks after ADP because the Tyreek Hill drafter was on the other side of us. We knew that. And so the only other guy we had to be worried about was the Devon Achane drafter, but he had 2 quarterbacks already. And so we push him, and no one else takes Tua, and he falls 17 picks past ADP because we're in a smart room, and we get to optimize our draft based on expecting other people to make good decisions for their team, because none of those people taking a little bit of an ADP discount with an uncorrelated Tua when you can't backstack him are going to be doing themselves any favors. But, like, okay, cool, you got a 12 pick ADP discount. Now you have a quarterback that, you're not going to win with. Like, they're not going to do that. And so those types of rooms can be helpful as well. I got to get back to actually making some picks, man. I didn't expect this much. And see, this is the problem. I'm going through the comments. I love to go through the comments. We joke about this every stream, but then I see something like historical anomalies point here, and then I go off on another rant about it. So you guys are awesome. I'm sure there are a ton of really good thoughts in these comments. I'm going to kind of scroll them, but Marshall's got a good thought here for the correlation plays. A lot could be considered anti-correlated. Blind correlation isn't valid either. I love that point. You start throwing in like a workhorse running back into a build just because he's on the same offense. Like a lot of the time it's like, man, no, his upside case is different. Now, a lot of the time it's just like, well, we're making a bet on the whole offense, and if they score a lot of touchdowns, then it's going to be good for everybody. But I do think there are some that can be considered anti-correlation for sure. Although that's the kind of thing that I do think can probably get solved over time. Like player archetypes can, correlation stuff can probably be solved over time a little bit. Chris says the reason analytics is so fun in football is there's not enough sample size for anything. You have to contextualize everything. I was talking through that. Man, these comments are at 7:21. It's 8:43 my time. I'm an hour and 20 minutes behind. I love your guys' comments though. Like, I mean, to me, this is a back and forth conversation that I love going back and forth with you guys. I love your thoughts, especially the ones that disagree with me. Like Grant, and this, I don't know what Grant's future comments were, but he was one of the people I was talking more directly to. He said, you spent the last 15 plus years studying this game. Random person will be able to buy an RTA tool and hop on and be able to build as strong of drafts as you on day one. It's a good summation of what I think can't happen. I don't believe my hard-won domain knowledge in this industry can be replicated by an RTA tool. I don't believe that. Maybe that's overconfidence in my own part. I've talked through for over an hour why I believe that. So I've tried to give my reasoning for that claim. And it's a lot of it is, logic. But I've also tried to give some pure examples. That's basically what the opposite of this could be the headline of this. And maybe I'll make it something like that when I re-headline this video after we get done, because I do think that's a really good summation of what I'm been trying to say for the last hour and a half. I don't believe is possible. Welp, you just said that. I mean, an hour and a half ago. I gotta, you guys know that I gotta. I'm sure you guys in the chat, like, just stop trying to read all the comments. There's so many comments. My God, you guys are awesome. Gretch just made one pick in over an hour. Oh, man. There is there's a chat here that says Ben 20-minute on NFL being solvable. Chat 20-minute ran on feet picks. I'm glad that I just scrolled through that 20-minute conversation. If there was a 20-minute conversation on feet picks there. Appreciate this, Grant. I see this. Nothing but love for you, Gretch. Appreciate the conversation as well. I completely appreciate your thoughts as well. Marshall said the same thing. Gretch looking for edge in FF. Chat looking to edge to feet picks. Whatever happened in chat, I'm glad that you guys, that's how you get me to speed up to the most recent picks, is I just got to fast forward when I start seeing the feet pick commentary. We're up to live now. Gretch puts the slow and slow draft. If Gretch doesn't make more picks, I'm not going to watch more than 2 hours today. Appreciate you guys. Paul says Gretch has made one pick and I've responded to one email. This is this is stealing signals. These are the testimonials for stealing signals. Where Marshall just said it. Can't wait till Gretch gets to the point where the chat devolved now that he's been complimenting us. I'm glad that I skipped the chat today. Perfect. You guys just need to devolve, and I just got to move. We got Katie saying Gretch doesn't like feet. It's literally football. It's not. I'm not a big foot guy. No, that's not a fetish of mine. All right, we got a few more. It's all super flex, man. All right, we're gonna go to this eliminator. The super flex drafts are just not doing it for me in the late rounds. Oh, cool. We're at an eliminator, and I have a pick. 12 picks behind ADP that I have started in the queue, so I assume that's just going to be the pick, and we're not even going to have a lot of fun here. Lamar Jackson and Justin Herbert. Najee Harris, because of the bye. I like him in the eliminator because of the bye. Zamir White, Devin Singletary, Kamani Vidal, and Bucky Irving, who you guys see on all my teams. Puka Nacua, Drake London, Zay Flowers, Xavier Worthy, Xavier Legette, Quentin Johnston, a couple Xaviers back-to-back, Dalton Kincaid, and Dallas Goedert. So I have Herbert with Quentin Johnston. And I think Quentin Johnston's at least a vaguely better pick in an eliminator format where you get the week 5 bye. The early buys are better. We've talked about that. And you also get the likelihood of routes, right? Like at that pick at 150, there's a little bit more of a floor. And maybe he can still break out, but like we have routes, right? We probably have some usable weeks. We probably have some floor of targets, unless he's just awful, which he might be. But at pick 150, I like that more in a format like the Eliminator. Even also, I think I've started to learn that my takes on the Eliminator are similar to my takes on the Marathon, because it's consistent production, consistent projectable role that starts from the early weeks. It's not quite the same, because with the Marathon, I still think, like backup running backs, I would still be like, yeah, they can break out and then be huge hits for best ball in the back half of the year. That's still really helpful in Marathon. It might kill you in the Eliminator. I mean, not kill you, but like not getting the early production might be a problem. By the way, so chat says early buy is better in the Eliminator. Let's I talked about this a little bit on stealing signals yesterday, and our first episode was drafting an Eliminator team. It's a tight hour draft, and I fire off a ton of Eliminator takes. So if you like my rants, and I'm drafting with Sean Siegel, who's obviously brilliant, and it's a really good team. I think there's a lot of really good Eliminator stuff in that video, or it's a video on the RotoViz YouTube channel. It's a podcast on our normal podcast network. I'm trying to think of where I have this table that I put into my Eliminator. It's on this yards per route run spreadsheet. So this is data from the Underdog Eliminator. If you read my piece, you'll recognize this, except for this column. Column D is a new column I put in. I'm probably going to have a second Eliminator thing, because I've continued to think about the Eliminator contest. So the reason early buys are better is the percent of the field that advances from a given week is higher early on. And so you can get away with having guys on buy easier. And then also, as it gets lower in the later part, you're also talking about those pods being stronger because you've had a lot of teams eliminated. These are the very best teams. This column is so interesting, and I wish I would have thought to put it before. One of the things I wrote about in my Eliminator, if you go out week 12 where there's 6 buys, you actually make $50. $10 buy-in, you 5x, you make $40 profit. You go out week 14 where there's 6 buys, you can 10x your money, right? If you build a team with all week 14 buys, you're increasing the likelihood that you can get deeper because you don't have the early buys. That doesn't mean you're definitely going to, because of this column. This is this column that I keep talking about that I added. Percent of the field remaining entering the week. This is super important. This is why my whole first Eliminator piece was aimed at, like, people are too worried about the floor in the Eliminator. You have to build a good team, man. You have to build ceiling. Katie, I see Katie. That's great in the chat. I look ahead, and Katie's comment is, if the NFL wants female viewership, no cleats on Monday Night Football. Katie's in defeat. She wants barefoot place kickers, as Kevin mentions. The percent of the field remaining column is so interesting. Obviously, entering week 1, you have 100% of the field remaining. By week 2, you're already down to 83% of the whole field, because only 83% advance out of the first pod, then 80% advance the next week, but you're still down to 2/3 of the field. Entering week 3, 1/3 of the drafted eliminator teams will have been eliminated. Entering week 5, almost 2/3 will have been eliminated. Your team probably isn't even going to make it to the buys. Like, think about the ramifications of that for a second. This idea of the percentage of the field that advances from each week is relevant. The idea of, so I mean, it's still the case that early on you would love to get through your week 5 and 6 buys, maybe, the week 7 buys, the week 9 buy, because if you can get through that, then you're still going to be battle tested when these pods are really tough. Because now you're talking about the pods by week 9, 9.2% of the field enters week 9. That's the top 10% best teams, or most consistent teams. Maybe some good teams will be eliminated. It won't be the best teams. There's pod luck, everything else. But it's going to be good teams, man, right? It's going to be some of the very best teams that were drafted. Your pod's going to be difficult when you hit the week 9 buys. When you hit week 12 and 6 teams are on bye. Now, one of the things that's going to happen with these buys as well is an abnormal amount of the teams that reach the week 12 bye will probably have an abnormal amount of week 12 and week 14 buys. Right? We would expect it to at least shade that direction. There's a lot of good players with 12 and 14 buys. The Texans, the Ravens, they're both in 14. 12 has a ton of good ones. Bills, Falcons, I'm targeting heavily. And only 2.3% of teams are going to enter week 12. Only 0.8% are going to enter week 14. You want to talk about drafting a top 1% team? Just to get to week 14, you have to do that. The reason I thought about doing this, making this column and really thinking through it on these terms, is I had written about how in week 12, you get a $50 prize if you're eliminated. In week 14, you get a $100 prize if you're eliminated. And I thought through it, and I'm like, man, that's a lot of money to be given out unless there's a really small amount of the field left at that point. So I went back and looked at it. I mean, this is really, really crazy. Benny says there's the most teams on bye week 12 and 14. That's, a huge point. I'm trying to drive home. You guys are still FBI. Please go to BS Burf House. Why are you talking about monkey feet now? Oh my God. What, out of context, Chris's question, do you find monkeys attractive, is a little bit much. I see that his comment right before that was bro what with 5 question marks. But I saw this one first, Chris. So if in the future, maybe string those two things together, put bro what before this, because I could just pull this up and it's like, hey, Chris Diaz is asking this question about finding monkeys. All right, we got to get back on track. But this is an interesting thing to consider about the Eliminator format is a lot of your teams are not even going to make it to like week 7. The buy stuff you're thinking about, you're not even going to get to. And this also gets back to why I have emphasized in my earlier Eliminator write-up and in a lot of other stuff that when we've talked about the Eliminator, you got to get. So Benny says he agrees getting good players through early buys is very powerful. Just hadn't heard it phrased as early buys are good. The point is, it's harder to win in the week, to really articulate. It's harder to win in the week where you have guys on buys. So if you have more guys on buys, no matter what week you have guys on buys, you're going to be behind the 8 ball. I've talked about week 7 and 9. They both only have 2 teams on bye. There's no one in week 8. 7 and 9 are 2 weeks where you only have 2 teams on buys. And so you want to try to get exposure to guys that have those buys so you can spread out your buys. But one of the things I thought through about that as well is, appreciate this, Meatwad. He says, Signal somehow gets better every stream. It's unreal. I appreciate you guys. But the week 7 and 9 buys thing, if you start to stack week 7 buy or week 9, I showed you guys some teams where I have like Purdy and Kittle because it's the Niners and the Steelers in week 9. I have like Purdy and Kittle and I have Warren. You're going to be in a pod with a lot of people who don't have a week 9 buy at all in their roster. So you have 3 guys on buy and you're trying to advance against a pod that nobody has anybody on buy on. So like even this point, you got to spread the buys evenly with positions. Where I'm starting to evolve my thinking is you actually have to weight your buys to where the buys actually are. You probably should have a few more week 12 buys and week 14 buys, because if you do get your team there, your pods are going to have a higher proportion than expected by random chance of players on week 12 and 14 buys, in part because those guys haven't been on buy yet, so it's helped them advance up to that point. And also in part because there are just more teams on those buys. There's more players to be drafted with those buys. So if you spread it evenly, you're going to have more buys than average on 7 and 9, and you're going to have less than average on 12 and 14, which is probably good. You want to probably have less than average on 12 and 14 if you can perfectly help it, because that's where it's really hard to advance. If you're really trying to win this thing, again, you would like your buys early because it's easier to advance through those weeks. And so when you're shorthanded, you would prefer it to be when you're in a pod that 75% of the pod advances from, and we've only gone through 4 cuts. And so there's a decent amount of the field still left. You're not down to the top 1% of the field like you are in week 14. You're, in week 5, 37% of the field is remaining. There's still a lot of bad teams in that group. In week 6, 28%, there's still a lot of bad teams. You can advance from the 75% advance rate if there's just 2 bad teams in your pod, right? And you can get fortunate. I would bet that the overall winner has some good, week 5 and 6 players in it. The Rams, the Chiefs, Jalen Hurts I've taken a few times over Josh Allen because he has the week 5 bye. Josh Allen has the week 12. That's the way that I'm doing it in terms of valuing the early buys. I'll make the little changes within tiers. Like Jalen Hurts doesn't go much farther behind Josh Allen, but in this format, Jalen Hurts should go ahead of Josh Allen, in my opinion, because he's a week 5 bye. And you still want to be able to stack him because the final week is a 115-team final. You still want that one game upside. So my Jalen Hurts teams, I've been taking some. Typically, I might not already have A.J. Brown or Devonta Smith, so I've been trying to take some Dallas Goedert on those teams. I believe the one we were just looking at was a Jalen Hurts, Dallas Goedert Eagles team. That's how I got to that, because I don't actually go out of my way to get A.J. Brown at his cost. The Eliminator. This was a Hurts team, wasn't it? Oh, no, this was a Lamar Jackson team. Well, I have other Eliminators that are Hurts teams. That's a Stroud. Anyway, I do also kind of like a higher end QB for stability at an important position for, being consistent throughout the year. I think having the QB1, if you get that right, in the Eliminator format will be very helpful in the Eliminator format, especially. My cover band is guys on buys. Everyone give it up for Gretch and the guys on buys. Huhames, I think I'm saying that right, says if you stack the lines week 5 buy, you get past week 5, you should be playing full roster versus the field the rest of the way. This is another good way of thinking about it. It's like you're probably going to go out early. That's what I was trying to show with how many people go out early. But if you can get through that early buy, you're probably going to go out early regardless. One of the things about the Eliminator that I didn't realize is I'm going to draft a bunch of these teams, and most of them are going to be gone by week 7. And I'm just going to be hoping that the one that's still around, keeps winning every week. But kind of a fun format from that perspective too. It gives you the freedom to take big upside swings, to really go after your picks and try to build an upside roster. It's not about floor picks. That was the point I was trying to drive home too, and trying to drive home in my first Eliminator write-up. There's some stuff that I've done that is floor-based in the Eliminator, and I've talked through that. But ultimately, you want to build the best freaking team that's going to score a lot every single week. So even when it has a down week, it's still scoring enough to advance. Like, that's how you stay above the cut line every week in an Eliminator. You have a team that's finishing first in your pod most weeks. Not most weeks, but a lot of weeks, right? Like, it's so good. And it's like, I think people see Eliminator and they're like, man, I got to get these guaranteed touches and this and that. I do think, and I again talked through this with Sean, you want to find players that have roles and upside, right? So you're not sacrificing upside. But like somebody I've taken a lot of in the Eliminators is James Conner. He had his first 1,000-yard season last year, 5+ yards per carry. People are down on him. Talked about him a little bit in the ship chasing channel this morning. But that's a format where like he's gonna be their lead back early, and if he stays healthy, he might just hold that job the whole year over Trey Benson and Benson's rookie year. I think they think of Conner as kind of their main guy. Now Conner usually does miss a few games, but if this is the year where he stays healthy all year, that's baked into his price. You're talking about the kind of upside that it's not league winning upside, but it's upside to cost where he's going. He would be a really good pick there if he stayed healthy all year and was their lead back. He'd be a really good pick in that range because you've probably gone 0 RB and built a bunch of receiver depth and elite tight end and elite QB, and then you have James Conner as one of your top running backs, and he's usable every week. Like that's upside for the format. So there are those types of picks that I am making. However, I do think you want to be thinking through like, how do I score a ton of points? And for the Conner pick, again, it's structurally it's a 0 RB build where you're scoring a ton of points with ceiling plays in the receiver depth and at the elite onesie positions. And then Connor's strong at running back, and that's helping you score a ton of points. I mean, that's one way you get there is being really high upside at every other position. And I did argue in my write-up that 0 RB is very viable in the Eliminator format. All right. We're going to make this Eliminator pick. I believe it is Marvin Mims, who has a Week 14 bye. I have one other Week 14 bye on the receiving core right now, and that's also my QB. Lamar is stacked up. I don't have a Houston bring back on the roster. Again, it would be starting to load up on 14 buys. It probably just didn't fit. Obviously, like to take a Texan in like every draft, so I'm kind of curious why that happened. In round 3, I took Zay. In round 4, I took Lamar to stack with Zay. So I missed Tank Dell, and it was a later draft slot, so I don't get Nico or Diggs at that point. Diggs doesn't make it back to me, so that makes sense. You can't really get Zay and Lamar with a Texan unless you take Nico in the second round, but I got Drake London at 17. I could have went out of my way to get Dalton Schultz, but I was going out of my way to get Dallas Goedert. I didn't need to go out of my way to get Dallas Goedert because I don't have Jalen Hurts here. I could have went Schultz, but I went Goddard. I do remember this now. So Goddard was a little bit of an ADP value here, and Schultz would have needed to come back to 128, which I didn't anticipate necessarily happening. But you see that no tight end went all the way down at the end of round 10 or all the way back in round 11, and then I passed him, and then Schultz ends up going the next tight end after Goddard, but he goes a round and a half later. Anyway, I'm just thinking through what happened here, but I didn't want to pass up the Goddard value with an early buy, and I kind of like Goddard as a tight end too, and then also miss on Schultz, and then be kind of out in the cold as far as a tight end 2 is concerned. I got Goddard right at ADP, but that was sort of the thought process, I think, there, worrying about both of those guys going before it came all the way back to me. In hindsight, I would certainly prefer a running back pick there and Schultz instead of Leggett. 3 straight Chargers here, round 5 or week 5 buys. Herbert, Quentin Johnson, Vidal, same concept. If I can get that Charger stack through, that one of the commenters just mentioned about the Lion stack. If I can get my Charger stack through, yeah, like Goff week 5 buy, great QB2 on basically any team too. I agree with this, but also Herbert for the same reason. Meatwat says, seems you're out on AJB. Not a huge AJB guy, but it at least seems his underlying numbers are great. Curious for your thoughts on him and where he goes in drafts. I think he's a perfectly fine pick. He should go before the end of the first round. I just prefer the Garrett Wilson profile more because I think there's the potential for a greater concentration of targets there. Garrett Wilson can, like, people have been concerned about Aaron Rodgers plays slow. They're not going to throw a ton, but I think he can consolidate volume the way CeeDee Lamb did in Dallas last year. That's just a Garrett Wilson skill take that I understand that Alan Lazard's still there and Mike Williams and Tyler Conklin and other guys are going to catch the ball. Breece Hall is going to catch the ball out of the backfield. Yeah. What do you think about the leg up slide kick tool? Watch the first hour of the stream. I talked about it for about an hour and a half. So it's definitely a big part of what we've covered already today. But yeah, I think Garrett Wilson can basically be the 180 target guy in that offense, even if they're not a huge high pass volume team, because I think he's that good. And I think Rodgers likes to lock on to number ones who are that good. So I think the fit is just really nice. So I like AJ Brown a lot, but I just don't. My concern remains for the Eagles' total pass volume. Jalen Hurts' mobility is important. They then paid to bring in Saquon Barkley. I think they want to be a run-based team, especially when leading. And they're a good team. I think they're going to bounce back and win games this year and lead. And so AJ Brown to me is like he's a nice pick in that range, but he's not like at the end of the first round. I want a player that I think can go in the top 5 the next year, and I just don't think he can go in the top 5 next year. So that's kind of the bummer. Oh, I just noticed in this draft we got our buddy Eric Beim for. I've seen him a couple times. He's I zoomed in too far to show his name, but he's 2 picks behind me in this one. He's in a couple of these eliminators with me. He signed up for some slows at the same time. Mims, I'm adding here in part because of the. Why did I put Mims in this? Man, I just like the player. Maybe I just thought I needed more wide receiver upside because typically I have 5 receivers before Leggett. Leggett as a wide receiver 5 is a concern for me. Quentin Johnson as a wide receiver 6 is a concern for me. That's really the answer, I think, is like I just like not even worried about buys. This team needs to be good. Marvin Mims is another good swing. And so to get him at a price discount is really nice. It does open up Bo Nix, but then I was looking that like my QB1 has the same buy as Bo Nix. So I don't really love the idea of Bo Nix as my QB3. Puts a lot of pressure on Justin Herbert week 14. Although because it's week 14, it's like if I even get there, it'll be great. So I don't really worry about putting pressure on week 14 as much. It's like, man, I should probably just make the good decision. So I am putting Nix in the queue here along with Young. I'm going to take a third QB. Xavier Leggett is another option there. And I grabbed Bucky Irving as a bring back. So Young is a nice week 17. I got a Carolina Tampa Bay thing going on. If I am able to get there and all the way there, and Lamar Jackson's big, but he has a bad week 17. The Bryce Young to Xavier Leggett with a Bucky Irving bring back could be the thing that wins me that 115-man final in week 17. I don't have a Cincinnati bring back. I just took Mims. So, I mean, Nix is not a great fit for this team. Although, part of the reason I took Mims is he gets the Chargers in week 16. So it does start to get really tight in those pods. I'm still kind of looking at some of the late season correlation stuff as well. Although, you're still in a pod in week 16. It's not the same deal, but it is nice. You get Mims as a bring back on the Chargers in the other time they face as well. Basically, you need upside throughout. So drafting in the same division gives you, 2 divisional games. I have Xavier Worthy on this team as well. So I have the 3 Chargers players, Herbert, Vidal, and Quentin Johnston. I was thinking through a little bit about how you can get some little game stacks throughout the season. I think that was part of why I was looking at Mims and a Denver pick there. All right. Some super flex picks left, but we still haven't done the wheel. You guys gotta tell me. Texans. So I always forget that you guys can't hear me while the wheel's spinning. It's the Houston Texans. I thought it was going to go over to the Chiefs We're gonna remember some guys for the Houston Texans is going to be relatively short. They just started existing in like 2002. But Andre Johnson is the first one that comes to mind. Guy was an absolute stud. Brian says, Ben talks during the will check. Dominic Davis. This is my favorite player, like in my fantasy football history. His name changed to Dominic Williams. For whatever reason, I freaking loved this dude. I had him for a couple years. It's because we started playing PPR before PPR was like a whole thing. I was playing PPR in like 2003, 2004. And look at Dominic Williams back in. So he's a 23-year-old. Runs for 300 times for 1,100 yards and 13 touchdowns in his second season. I definitely had him this year in my league of record. 68 catches as well for 588 yards, 1,776 yards, 14 touchdowns. The next year, he only plays 11 games, but has another 1,300 yards and 6 TDs. And then he's out of the league. He never plays another snap in the NFL. He played 3 seasons. All 3 years, his yards from scrimmage were 1,300 yards or higher. He went 8 touchdowns, 14 touchdowns, 6 touchdowns. He caught 47 balls, 68, then 39 that third year when he only played 11 games. He rushed for at least 976 all 3 years, which, again, that 976 was the third year. His yards per game was increasing. He was up to 88.7 yards per game in that third season on the ground. Yards per game receiving had gone down a little bit, but like it seemed like he was just getting better and better. I don't remember what his injury was, but this dude never plays another game. He's a later round pick, a 4th round pick. His name is now Dominic Williams on the site. It says note, also known as Dominic Davis. During the time that he played, he was Dominic Davis. Changed his name after. It was his, I believe, mother, father, last names. He changed to I believe his mother's name. But so crazy. 23 years old, 24 years old, 25 years old, 3 straight 1,300-yard seasons. And the guy never plays another snap at the NFL level. A long run in each season of at least 44 yards. He was like somewhat explosive too, and this guy that could play out of the backfield and catch a ton of balls. Like career yards per target of 6.4. That's above average. Last 2 seasons were both 7.0. The average for a running back is about 6.0. Solidly efficient receiving back. Career 4.1 yards per carry rusher. He was just kind of an average rusher, but for a high volume guy that also got goal line work, decent success rate, and caught out of the backfield. I mean, what more could you want? This was like the types of stat lines that like Steven Jackson was putting up, in the years that followed this. I was going to say at the same time, but this is a little bit before Steven Jackson's time, I think. And Steven Jackson was awesome, but Steven Jackson did it for longer because he could play every down, like Steven Jackson was the man. Yeah, he starts in 2004. But he's putting up very similar numbers every season, 1,300 yards, 6 to 8 touchdowns, a couple double-digit touchdown seasons. He has this 1 year in 2006, 2,300 total yards and 16 TDs. But, the receiving to go with the rushing efficiency isn't like elite. Yards per attempt it's better than Dominic Davis, but it's not elite, mostly in the 4.2 to 4.4 range. But he did it for 3 years and then the career just ended. And again, one of my favorite players to reminisce about. All right, you guys have a lot of names already out here. And I've loved seeing some. Corey Bradford, obviously David Carr comes up. My man Kenny Stills, Jacoby Jones, Steve Slayton. You want a Dominic Davis comp? Steve Slayton only plays 4 years. He's a 3rd-round pick. His rookie season, he goes for 1,600 yards and 10 TDs. A lot of people's like sleeper, or not sleeper for the next year, but he was going really high the next year in a lot of leagues. Like he was at their breakout player that they were putting in the back of the first round, and then some people would rank him like top 5 overall and be like, "Ooh, you're ranking Steve Slayton top 5 overall." The next season, he doesn't run effectively. Goes from 4.8 yards per carry to 3.3. Really struggles the next year. Still good in the passing game, but the yards from scrimmage fall way off because he's suddenly like a really inefficient runner. And then he gets hurt late, and then Arian Foster takes over, who we see a bunch. Vegan, smart, free thinker. We're getting the Wikipedia page for Arian Foster. 2009 is the year Steve Slayton is going to be his second year and he gets hurt. 2009 is the year where Arian Foster is a rookie. And at the end of the season in 2009, Arian Foster rushes 19 times for 97 yards and a TD in week 16, and rushes 20 times for 119 and 2 TDs with 3 receptions in week 17. And this is like everybody's on him the next year because he had the little breakout late in the year. I remember I didn't get him in any of my drafts. By this time, I was playing in a bunch of different leagues. I didn't get him in any of my drafts, but my home league was the last one, that league of record I was talking about that I've played for so many years. It was my last draft, and I was like, I'm getting Arian Foster. I'm taking him in the 5th round. He's been rising, 8th round, 7th round, 6th round. I have not gotten a share yet. I'm going to take him in the 5th round, and I still remember freaking Kevin Pistoli took him at the 4-5 turn. Damn it, Kevin. He was the 412, 501. He takes him. I was planning to take Arian Foster 3 rounds higher than he was ranked in anyone's book. Everyone still had the notebook. We still did live drafts, but Kevin was on Arian Foster too. Knew he was rising. Took him at like 412. I just thought there was no world in which I was going to get sniped on him that year. And then he goes on to have a 1,600-yard rushing season to lead the NFL, 16 rushing TDs, leads the NFL with 393 touches, 2,200 yards, 18 TDs. Next year, 330 touches. Next year, 391 touches. One of the few guys that the curse of 370 touches didn't seem to affect. He has 3 straight years of 330 plus, all with 1,600 plus touchdowns, all with 1,600 plus yards, 12 plus touchdowns in all 3 years. Just an insane peak. Arian Foster was so fun those years. Gets hurt in 2013, but is still really good per game that year. Caught a bunch of balls as well. His yards per game had actually come down a little bit in 2013, but comes back in 2014. Another 298 touch season, 1,500 yards and 13 TDs. So another really, really great year. 4 out of 5 seasons. You put that much tread on the tire, you usually don't play too much more after that. He only plays in 8 more games the rest of his career. Absolutely one of my favorite running backs to watch of my lifetime. That guy was incredible. Owen Daniels is a great name. He was it's funny. They have the shorter history, but they've got a lot of fun. Remember some guys, fantasy football dudes. Owen Daniels here in 2008, he only had 2 touchdowns, but a 70 catch, 860 yard season. The year prior, 768 yards. Couple good seasons. Go fast forward to when he's 30, he has another 716 yard season, 100 plus targets, 62 catches, 6 TDs. Back in 2012, that mattered at tight end even more than it matters now. It still would be relevant at tight end now. Good seasons from Owen Daniels over the years in Houston. Will Fuller. God, there's a name I haven't heard in a little while. Lamar Miller. It's a fun dude. Jamie Sharper was part of the OG crew on the defensive side. Rex Burkhead. Mario Williams, Vince Young, and Reggie Bush at the top of drafts that year. Everybody thought Reggie Bush should go 1 or 2. It was a huge deal that they took Mario Williams over Reggie Bush. Vince Young goes 3. Obviously, very different conversation today. Matt Schaub. Feels like a feedback guy. Matt Schaub was actually a super fun fantasy QB as a drop back passer. Also just like massive amount of pick sixes. Kind of a goober. But he had some good years. This 2009 season, he leads the NFL in completions, attempts, yards per game, obviously, as well. 4,700 yards passing, 29 TDs. That's the one really good year that he had. CJ Fedorowicz. You guys are, these are great. Saw a bunch of these names the other day. Andrew says Alfred Blue, Jordan Akins, Kiki Kuti. Man, those are some good ones as well. We do miss Dominic Williams. TJ Yates starting in a playoff game. They traded for Osweiler after he busted in Denver. Yep, that was a problem. Tan Orlovsky. Yeah, he might have played for them. Steven Jackson broke a guy's forearm with his quad. AJ Dillon could never run that angry. I love that. Kevin Walter. There's another good one. He was the number 2 alongside Andre Johnson for a while. Andre Johnson is one of the more underrated players in fantasy football history. But yeah, Walter here in 2008 has an 899-yard, 8-touchdown season, followed right behind an 800-yard, 4-touchdown season the year prior. Andre Johnson just would never score touchdowns, but he was the guy catching all those passes from Schaub. Leads the NFL in receiving yardage 2 years in a row. Leads it in yards per game in 3 of 4 seasons, not including one of the years where he led it in cumulative yardage. So that peak there, 2007 to 2010, he either leads the league in receiving yards per game or total receiving yards in every season. Never catches 10 touchdowns, 8, 8, 9, 8. I mean, he never his whole career caught 10 touchdowns in a season. The teams just weren't very good. But every year, like clockwork, this guy was an absolute stud. 115 catches in 2008, 112 in 2012. He actually led in receptions in 2006. So you could say it was a 5-year stretch where he led the NFL in at least one of those 3 categories: receptions, receiving yards, or receiving yards per game. All 5 seasons. And then arguably his best season by total yards, isn't a part of that group. It's in 2012. He has 112 catch, 1,598, but only 4 touchdown season. Next year, 109 catch, 1,407 yard season. This guy had an awesome career. And he was super good. Like, he was fun to watch. Remember when he got in that fight with Cortland Finnegan? We got a Derek Mason and an Eric Moulds. I don't even think I remember those guys playing for that team. David Johnson was a Texan to start. No, he was a Texan to finish, and it was bad. Ben Tate. There's your, if you want a negative Trey Benson comp, we were talking about him in the chat earlier. I've mentioned him a couple times. Some of these dudes are really intriguing. He was a 2nd-round pick, really good athletic profile, comes in to back up Arian Foster, and he has to just back up Arian Foster. Not that James Conner is Arian Foster, obviously, but Ben Tate waits for his turn, and then when he gets it, he's not very good. He was never, it's that rookie year, he was really efficient, 5.4 yards per carry. But I think Arian Foster was even better that year. He did have 1,000 yards from scrimmage as a rookie. In a year where Arian Foster still had 1,800 yards. That's crazy. Foster had the 1,800-yard season in a year where Ben Tate came in as a rookie, had 1,000 yards behind him. Andre Johnson, that's the year Andre Johnson got hurt at age 30. Only played 7 games. You don't get a lot of passing. Matt Schaub only throws for 2,500 yards. Oh, he got hurt too. So this is the TJ Yates year. Matt Leinart starts a game for him. They go to the playoffs. They actually win a playoff game. Did TJ Yates start in this game? Yeah. TJ Yates goes 11 for 20 in a playoff game and wins because Arian Foster runs 24 times for 153 yards and 2 touchdowns. Andre Johnson was back and caught for 90 yards in a TD. Basically, all TJ Yates could do was throw the ball towards Andre Johnson. No one else caught anything in this game. 29 yards for Owen Daniels, 11 for Kevin Walter, and then 29 for Arian Foster. No one else caught a pass. But they beat the Andy Dalton, early career Andy Dalton throws 3 picks. The Cedric Benson, AJ Green, Jermaine Gresham Bengals. And then the next week, they lose to the Ravens. They actually competed with the Ravens. They only lost by 7. This is the best version of the Texans, man. They were good in this little era. You got TJ Yates out here throwing 3 picks, and this is the Joe Flacco, Ray Rice, Anquan Bolden. This Ravens team probably goes on to win the Super Bowl. Oh no, they lose the very next week to the Patriots that year. But the Texans were in this game. Can you imagine if TJ Yates played in a Super Bowl? They could have. They would have had to go on and beat the Patriots the next week, but they could have been. They could have been contenders if Schaub stays healthy. Texans career leaders are interesting. Andre Johnson, a nuke lead by a wide margin. Owen Daniels is third all time, followed by Kevin Walters, Fuller, and Brandon Cooks, who barely played there a couple years. Do we do Alfred Blue yet? I didn't like Alfred Blue. Who Hames regretfully did. Jabbar Gaffney. That's a good one. That is a good pull. Braxton Miller. People really wanted Braxton Miller to convert a quarterback out of Ohio State to be a thing. Have we hit the 7th inning stretch on the stream yet? We're still remembering some guys. What up, FDR? What's up, Dom? Our buddy from the Go Bills team, Dominic Biryani. Oh, because I titled this Fantasy Football Fireside Chats. That's right. Because somebody in the comments has been calling my streams the Fireside Chats. I liked that. Decided to use it. So Dom shows up, calls me FDR. Appreciate that. Yeah, sometimes you got to spell it out for me, Dom. You know that. Neil Rackers was their kicker. He was good. He had he hit like a ton of field goals that season, that one year, and was like the kicker won by a lot. Cecil Shorts. Think of him more as a Jaguar, but that's a throwback. Did we do the Jaguars already? We did. Did we talk about like Mike Sims Walker and Cecil Shorts? I don't think we talked. I think I maybe mentioned Mike Sims Walker, Mike Thomas. The Jags have some fun dudes, but we already did a Jag show because we talked all about Brian Thomas. Did we talk about Fred Taylor and Maurice Jones-Drew? I feel like we must have went quickly through the Jaguars. Remember some guys. I don't really remember talking through all those dudes. Oh, you were here, Dom. I did mention Sims Walker. Don't think Cecil Shorts made it. Ernest Wilford for the Jags. All right. Let's talk about the 2024 Houston Texans. Speaking of fireside chats, this is where I just go in a freaking rant. I don't know if this is a fireside chat or I don't even know what you call when I start digging into these teams. But obviously, CJ Stroud is where the conversation starts and ends. One of the really interesting things about his 2023 is you do still have some down games. I kind of talked about this on Stealing Signals, like this Carolina game. Stealing Signals this week, for anyone who listens to it, you'll hear some of this overlapping. This happens with rookies, right? They see some defensive look they haven't seen yet. It's harder to adjust in game when you haven't actually seen it and had to make those types of adjustments, even if you're an absolute stud. And at this point, CJ Stroud, I mean, look at that. He threw his first interception the week prior. Remember how long he went without throwing a pick? At this point, he's 9 touchdowns, 1 pick. He's throwing for how many yards per game? 276 yards per game at this point already to start his career. His first 6 games, he's a stud. Even though his very first game in Baltimore wasn't a great one. He takes 5 sacks right away. But that Indy game in week 2, 384 yards. He's doing great. Eventually, he goes to Carolina, of all places, the horrible Carolina Panthers, and the Texans lose. They give the Panthers their only win of the entire season. They had 2 wins last year, sorry. One of their only 2 wins of the season. They lose 15-13. And CJ Stroud, as a rookie, seeing some stuff for the first time, goes 16-24 for 140 yards. Just a bad game. They don't run a lot of plays. Clearly, they must have had a run-first mentality early because they only end up throwing 24 passes. They have 30 rushes in this game, 24 passes. They take 2 sacks, 56 total plays. Go look at the drive summary in this game. Punt, 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 punt. The touchdown on the third drive. Punt, punt. Fumble early in the second half. Somebody fumbles. Maybe it was Stroud. 2 good touchdown drives, but then multiple other punts. All of those punts were 5 plays or fewer in terms of total plays on those drives. And they only run 9 total drives. The average is usually about 11. Both of their touchdown drives were very long. All their other drives combined are super short. None of them go for 3 minutes. But I guess the Panthers are able to milk some clock. They have the 6-minute field goal drive at the end. They have a 5-minute drive in the second quarter. Kind of trying to figure out why there weren't more overall possessions in this game. I guess it's because the Texans had a 9-minute drive and a 7-minute drive. That makes sense. Their 2 touchdown drives took up well over a quarter of the game. And then the Panthers, are able to milk it late with the 6-minute drive. That takes up a lot of the time in the game. But the point is that in terms of what can CJ Stroud do going forward? What was he last year? What's the next step? First of all, very film-based take, I think he's already elite. And then, look, he only threw for 4,100 yards and 23 TDs, but only 5 picks. And they did kind of do some of the stuff like we saw in that Panthers game where they came out with a run. I remember that they came with a run-heavy focus. It's what I expect for this year is you don't see the negative pass rate over expected games like that. You don't see the games in his game log where the team is well, Carolina's got a weak run D. We're going to run on them, and then we're going to wind up losing to a terrible team because we didn't let CJ Stroud win the game for us. They go and trade for Stephon Diggs. They understand they're in a rookie QB window, and their rookie QB is a stud. And the reality about the rookie QB window is it's so narrow. You got to extend Stroud soon enough. They already extended Nico. That's why they traded a second-round pick for Diggs to only immediately change his contract to a 1-year deal. A bunch of people said that's an overpay. They give up a second-round pick, and they're only going to have him for 1 year. They understand this is where you push the chips in. That's why they also signed to Neil Hunter. They brought in to Nico Autry. They added 3 Aziz Al-Shaair is the other front 7 guy. They bring 3 pretty potentially impactful front 7 guys to add with Will Anderson, who's the defensive rookie of the year. This team's going to be good up front on defense. They're going to be good on offense. I've called them the best threat to the Chiefs in the AFC. It's kind of like the early Joe Burrow years after they were ahead of schedule and then they pushed in the rookie QB window. They had Trey Hendrickson and all that stuff. They had some important defensive players. You get impact players at other positions when you have your quarterback so underpaid. He gives you so much surplus value, and they know that, and they went and did that, but they also added Diggs. And when they added Diggs, that told you they're going to throw. The pass rate over expected on a weekly basis is going to be more consistent than it was last year. Stroud did throw a decent amount. And as far as, his raw numbers that I talked about, I forgot here, but he misses both weeks 15 and 16. He leaves 14 early, that Jets game. He did play 86% of the snaps in that game. So that's a game where he only throws for 91 yards on 23 attempts against a good Jets defense. But it's he left early. Well, no, he actually played that entire game. Basically, he plays most of the game. It's another really poor outcome for him. I don't think we're going to see games in his game log this year that are reminiscent of the Carolina and Jets game. I think you're going to see that step forward in year 2, the more consistent, high-end games, which we saw. Look at this Tampa Bay line. He completes 70+% of 42 passes for 470 yards, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions. That's the ceiling. That's the ability we saw throughout the year. We saw it into the playoffs. He goes in a home game against Cleveland and throws only 21 times because they blow Cleveland out. I think they had some takeaways and stuff as well early. But on those 21 throws, 274 pass yards, 3 TDs. Does struggle a little bit in Baltimore the next week, which was, reminiscent of week 1, but is still so clearly an elevator for fantasy football, an elevator of the talent around him. I've seen a lot of discussion about his price. I've seen a lot of really smart, intelligent conversation. I did a show with Eric Beimfor, who I've mentioned a couple times on the stream, at Spike Week. Also had Rich Rebar and John Daigle on, and we did a draft of our least favorite picks by ADP. And Stroud came up, I believe, for Daigle, and then Rebar, sort of backed it up. And Rebar's known for the Konami code and has done so much research on mobile quarterbacks. And he's like, look, man, I get it. I'm in love with CJ Stroud too. I really want to be in on him. But there's been a lot of guys like this, and he fired off some good names. And I was like, yeah, I bit into that too. Burrow was one. Early Burrow in the 5th round, early career Burrow, where you're like, man, this guy's going to have the ceiling pocket passer year where he throws for 4,540 touchdowns or whatever. And it's going to make it all worth it that you took him this high. And And so Reeves is like, look, I want to be in on. I don't even know what his stance is. I think ultimately his stance is like, you do have to fade a guy who doesn't offer a lot of mobility. He only runs for 167 yards last year. He did have 3 rushing TDs, but he's not gonna run. I mean, he's not 167 yards is not much at all. Like, he's a pocket passer. The passing numbers have to be elite to justify the ADP. And I do think there are valid questions about whether he can be that good. I also think, as good as he was as a rookie and as clearly as they're pushing in, the bigger concern for me is that they're too good on a team level. Their defense is good and they're winning games, and they don't throw in the second halves of games. And it's, their pass rate over expected does improve, but their expected pass rate falls. So their pass rate over expected is positive, but their expected pass rate is low because a lot of their second half snaps are in plus game script. That's the concern. And so their actual pass rate doesn't even get that much better because their expected pass rate falls because they get put in these plus scripts. Having said all of that, early career Josh Allen. I think I almost said Zach Wilson. Early career Josh Allen, they kind of stretch their legs to see what I've used this term, stretch their legs to see what they are. The Bills offense. First year with Stephon Diggs. And Allen has a monster season. A lot of that is the rushing production. Early career Patrick Mahomes, his first season as a starter, still his best statistical regular season, 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns. Only the second season of all time for somebody to do that. That's this year, right? 5,000 passing yards, 50 TDs in 2018, which is harder to do in today's NFL. It's not even Mahomes' career high. But back then, so like in 2018, he throws for 5,097. He's not even the league leader. He was the league leader in 2022. Again, these bold figures mean they led the league. Last year's season leader passing yards was Tua at 4,624, right? Because we don't get the explosives anymore. It's a lot harder to get to 5,000 passing yards. But I would contend if Stroud can hit a real ceiling, that would also mean that he could differentiate in a way. I mean, he missed 2 games and was really bad in those 2 others. He still finishes 8th in passing yards. I think Stroud could win passing yards by 500 yards. I think that's possible. I genuinely think that's possible. If they go as, stretch our legs, scorched earth kind of thing, as I think they could. Gretch, go home. I am home, man. I started at 7 a.m. It's only 9:38. My household's still kind of quiet around here. I'm excited to kick it with my girls in a little bit, but yeah, I still got a little bit left in me. It was part of why I started so early. Josh Allen, though, his 3rd season here, that's still a career high passing yards for him, 4,500. Still a career high passing TDs, 37. Obviously, again, he adds value with the legs. The point is, it's a career high, not career high passing attempts, but it was the year that they were sort of stretching their legs in terms of figuring out what they actually had, what they could be, what their ceiling was. With Mahomes, I would argue that they've pretty clearly changed their focus on offense in the regular season to kind of hold things back for the playoffs. I think the Bills are doing that now too, and they're restructuring their whole roster in a way that's like, we want to keep a sustainably competitive team. We got to like start the second window of Josh Allen's career. The first window was the Stephon Diggs era. That window's kind of come to a close. It didn't lead to a title, but now it's going to be a little bit of a different build where we can be sustainably consistent, playoff contender, ideally AFC East winning team. And so like the point is the focuses change when you're a multi-year playoff team. I think they changed for the Bills, now, and I think they've already changed for the Chiefs a couple years back, and I think they're already starting to change for the Bengals, right? And I think the T. Higgins stuff, and it's going to change even more because I do think Higgins is on a different team next year. It's going to change for the Niners, right? Once Ayuk goes to a different team, they're going to be more focused on the playoffs. They're going to be more focused on just getting there and getting through the regular season as opposed to putting your foot down and trying to dominate the regular season. That's what the Cowboys did last year. They tried to dominate the regular season, and they did. Dak had a great season. It was like one of his best years of his career. And you understand, like, that's where they were at from a team perspective after Kellen Moore left and Mike McCarthy's kind of on the hot seat and all those things. Dak throws, it wasn't a career high in passing yards, but a career high 36 touchdowns, leads the league in completions, leads the league in passing TDs, has a great season, runner up in the MVP. I do think there's this multi-year element to different offenses when they might peak. And that Houston, if you're worried about CJ Stroud's price, you run the risk of missing that. I'm taking my share of Stroud. I don't want to be overweight on him. I do hear the arguments that it's hard for his profile to hit at cost. I also think there is this 5,000 yard, 50 TD outcome when you have a Nico Collins, who's an absolute stud, and you have, and we're going to actually, let's look at the raw numbers first. Nico has the 80 catches, 1,297 yards. He only plays 15 games, 8 touchdowns, right? Tank Dell only has 700 yards because he only plays 11 games, but great seasons for both of them. The yards per out run stuff is so interesting. Devin Singletary, way better than Damian Pierce, who really struggled in this offense, 2.9 yards per carry. I thought about Pierce late in drafts. He goes so late that you're like, okay, well, he's probably a pretty clear handcuff. The other guy in the running back room is Dare Agumbawale, essentially, is their number 3 here. You go Joe Mixon, Damian Pierce, Dare. They got some, undrafted or 6th round rookie Jawar Jordan, undrafted rookie British Brooks. I don't know much about those guys. So anyway, I think Joe Mixon's probably a fine play. They traded for him. They paid him a bunch of money. As far as guys who have had their situation elevate who they are, Joe Mixon has always been that guy with the Bengals, but he's also going to be that guy with the Texans. Like, he's going to finish his career up and have had one of the more fortunate runs of offenses to play in that elevate his, statistical production and all that. He's typically always actually been pretty inefficient, but whatever. He's going to be productive in this offense because it's going to be hard not to be if this offense is as good as I think it can be. They have a smart offensive play caller in Bobby Slowick, who came over from the Niners and that McVay Shanahan system. He was an offensive assistant for the Niners for a couple of years, passing game specialist, passing game coordinator. He's now been the Texans coordinator for a couple of years and done some good things there. So anyway, I think Mixon's a fine pick. I don't like his cost, the opportunity cost. I think he's a fine pick. If he was cheaper, if he was going where, like, I don't know, DeAndre Swift is going or something, I'd probably take a lot of Mixon. I don't take a ton because I need to get the receiver depth there. I need to get the tight end. It goes back to what we talked about at the top of the stream, how last year, even though Christian McCaffrey was a smash pick in the first round, structurally, I actually probably didn't win huge money with your with your Christian McCaffrey teams because you wanted it to be hitting the running backs in the dead zone. And so frequently your build would be a wide receiver start hitting, ETN or Breece Hall in the dead zone, or both of them. Those are the types of builds that were like some of the strongest builds. It's one of those things where, like, a pick can be a good pick, but if the opportunity cost can make them a bad pick. I think Joe Mixon can be a strong return on investment from the perspective that people like to look at it, where, like, he's ranked RB whatever and he finishes RB whatever. I think he can definitely finish ahead of where he's ranked at the RB position. But in terms of, like, win rate and opportunity cost, man, I have a hard time seeing those running backs in that range being more impactful for best ball than the wide receiver depth that you forego, and the elite tight ends you forego, and the elite quarterbacks like a CJ Stroud that you could potentially take in a similar range. It's just really hard. So anyway, I think Mixon's a fine play for fantasy, but I also don't draft him a ton. But what I want to get to is the yards per out run profiles, because this is where the Texans are particularly interesting. Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell. We obviously only have the 1 year. Nico Collins, we're going to start here. And I'm going to hide some rows to try to get Tank on the bottom of the screen. All right. Hopefully you guys can see all that. Yeah, you can see Tank at the bottom of the screen there. So Nico, first 2 seasons isn't necessarily great. This yards per out run column, as we always talk about, it captures targets per out run and yards per target. Those equal yards per out run. But Nico does take a really big jump from 2021 to 2022. That's why a lot of people really liked the profile. He earns targets at a really good rate here at 22.4%. We see a steady climb. This is what, like, the breakouts look like in targets per out run terms when they actually happen. If I go way down here to Davante Adams, who's the classic example of a guy who wasn't good his first couple years. It's not an immediate jump up in his targets per out run. You see it's a steady build, 13.3 as a rookie, and he's not good. The yards per out run's bad. If you want a guy to turn around, it usually is a build back. He gets to a 1.58 yards per out run season, a 1.76, 2.12. Eventually becomes Davante Adams, and he's rattling off 2+ yards per out run seasons every year. And his targets per out run is similar, 13.3. He's in the 18s for a couple years, 21.4, 24.8. Then he's up to 29, 30, 30. Now, this is unique. What Davante Adams did going from a really bad first couple years to a, multiple years of almost 3 yards per out run is very unique. But I do buy the steady growth. It's like developing more in your game, and you have more to go to. And over time, as your sample gets bigger, you're showing that you're better and better and better. I buy that more than like a small sample, one great one-off year. And so Nico Collins, that's what I'm emphasizing here. His rookie season, not very good. Efficiency is not good. Quarterback plays terrible, right? But yards per targets per out run also not very high. Next season really takes a strong step forward, 6 percentage points up. As you guys know, the scale is like 15% to 25% is where most players are. Each percentage point is pretty big. Sub 15%, you're basically terrible. 25 plus, you're in the elite category. And the last year, he jumps up to 26% targets per out run. He gets into that elite category. And the big thing, yards per target also spikes. He's 11.9 yards per target. Wasn't very good the first 2 years. His yards per out run, 1.24, not great. 1.68, better, looking good. Okay, maybe he's something. 3.1 last year, including as the main guy down the stretch and into the postseason where Tank Dell is injured. And a lot of people have pointed out that Dell was actually slightly better when they were both on the field together. It matters a lot to me that when Tank Dell went out and Collins had all the attention on him, that he kept winning. And he was even better when he was the number one player. I want a guy who can win when defenses are like, that's the dude we got to stop. Because the other guys that were running routes at that point were these profiles. Robert Woods, 17% targets per route run, 6.0 yards per target, 1.02 yards per route run. They gave that guy 400 routes last year. This is why early in the offseason, I was like, they're going to upgrade their wide receiver 3 spot simply by it not being Robert Woods. I thought they might draft somebody. I thought that was a slight concern for Nico and or Tank Dell when I wrote the targets per route run pieces earlier in the offseason prior to the Diggs trade. The other guy in this offense that mattered was Noah Brown, 293 routes. This tells you there was not much target competition. Noah Brown, early in his career, he has a couple really small route sample seasons, 43 and 24, where he actually earned some targets, but that's, basically throwaway route samples, right? Any year where he's had 100 plus routes starting in 2020, he's been, pretty average, 15 to 18%, nothing exciting. The targets the overall yards per out run, not exciting. Last year in this offense, especially late in the year after Tank Dell went down and Robert Woods is the only other guy he's competing with alongside Nico Collins, he ends up with a career high for volume seasons, 18.4% targets per out run, also a career high yards per target. He has a 1.94 yards per out run season. This is the definition of situation elevated player, right? This is one of those reasons you are high on CJ Stroud, because he got Noah Brown to a 1.94 yards per out run. Now you can ask, well, why didn't he get Robert Woods better than 1.02? It's because Robert Woods is old and he's not even on a roster right now. He's done. His career's over. This is the type of thing that you're like, okay, CJ Stroud's probably him. Like if he's getting Noah Brown to that's what the great quarterbacks do. They elevate subpar talents to like great efficiency somehow. And then you have Dalton Schultz, who's never been anything, but he ties his career high yards per out run, which was in 2021, his best year in Dallas. And it's not because of targets per out run necessarily. It's a little, his targets per out run had gone down a little bit with a little bit more competition, a little bit up from his other best season. Yards per target is in between his best season and last season, whatever. You get what I'm saying. This is a good Dalton Schultz year as well, even though Dalton Schultz, by the way, had like some big drops issues last year. He had some really questionable efficiency at times. I want to get to Diggs and Dell, but first I'm going to go to let's talk about Dell too while we're on last year's Texans. So this is why I've been so much firmer with Collins than Dell. Dell's yards per out run at 2.22 is so good for a rookie, but only 320 routes. And a lot of it is more efficiency based, this 9.6 yards per target, as opposed to targets per route run, where it's 23.1% is still very good for a rookie at a high ADOT of 14.4. This weighted targets per route run, 0.66, is all very, very good. Tanktail's profile is very good. I'm very in on him. I'm not saying I'm out on him. The weighted targets per round is almost on par with Nico because his ADOT was so much higher. But just in terms of like you're adding Diggs now, Nico is showed a 26% targets per run. Some of that was after Dell was out. But again, he was able to really earn volume and win in the ways that we've talked about with like Matt Harmon. This is the stuff that for me, I think kind of overlaps with the great work he does when he starts talking about like winning against man coverage and stuff. Like I imagine Nico Collins looks good in that because I can see it. I can see that when he played as a single main wide receiver and he was getting focus from defenses, he was still able to earn targets at a really high rate. I can see it in the targets per out run numbers I'm saying. Now, I'm not assuming that I know what Harmon has written up for Collins, to be clear. But directionally similar is the point I'm trying to make, that Nico Collins looks great. The issue is this. Stephon Diggs didn't fall off, right? Like Stephon Diggs in his peak was a 2.5 plus yards per route run guy. In his down seasons in Buffalo, he's 1.9 to 2.0, which is still very good, man. 1.99 last year is still very good. 2.49 in 2022, even better. But the difference between, this is his 4 years in Buffalo. The difference between 2022 and 2020, which are the good years by yards per out run, compared to 2021 and 2023, which are the bad years, is not this. It is not volume earning. It's not targets per out run, which does dip a little in 2021, but at a little bit of a higher ADOT, so that his weighted targets per out run is still right in this range. His weighted targets per out run every year of those years, if I could zoom in a little more, 0.67, 0.65, 0.69, 0.69. It's hyper consistent. The difference is purely efficiency for Diggs. He's hyper efficient in 2020 and 2022, 9.5, 9.6 yards per target. He's massively less efficient in 2021 and 2023. He's a yard and a half or 2 yards less efficient because they're just like, I know in 2021, it was like he just didn't hit on as many deep balls with Josh Allen as they started to play some more of the over-the-top shells. Last year, I don't have as clean of an answer. In 2021, it was mostly like just catch rate. So if we go to Stephon Diggs' profile, why was his yards per target lower? It's not because of yards per reception in 2021. It's just catch rate. So catch rate here in 2021 is 62.8%. Yards per reception is solid, 11.9 after a 12.1 in 2020. Very similar, but his catch rate falls way off. And that just impacts his yards per target because it's catch rate. Even though his yards per reception is very similar, the profile is very similar, the targets are very similar, right? I just showed you his target earning was similar. All of his production was down in 2021 largely because he just didn't catch as many balls, which some of that was like catchable target rate, and some of it was like deep targets. But like the yards per reception was solid. They hit on a lot more stuff again in 2022. Catch rate jumps back up. Last year, the catch rate was still okay. It's a little bit of one and a little bit of the other. And so this is if you want to be out on Diggs, the yards per reception does fall last year. And some of that's because late in the year, Joe Brady, they're doing the underneath stuff, but maybe he's losing a little bit of a step. The catch rate falls a little and the yards per reception falls. Regardless, the other thing I would emphasize is the first year in Buffalo, Diggs is locked in. He's at times in his career seemed like the type of personality that gets a little bit antsy and isn't great. He in the locker room, great, I should say. That seemed to be the case in these last couple of years in Minnesota, right? A lot of talk about him leaving. That seemed to be the case the last couple of years in Buffalo. But after leaving Minnesota, he immediately locked in Buffalo. All of his offseason stuff right now is like he's locked in Houston. He knows he's going to be a free agent after the year. He agreed to that restructuring and liked that restructuring. I feel like you're going to get the motivated Stephon Diggs. And that's very much a player take. But I think he could still earn volume from a physical perspective. And I think you're going to get motivated, team first, everyone's best friend Stephon Diggs, like the early Bill stuff. But like he's also sort of this alpha profile type where he's gonna be on the sidelines and in the room demanding stuff. I don't think you can expect Stephon Diggs to be the number 3. The people that have said that when he got traded, it's just hard for me to visualize a guy that has had these weighted targets per out run for this many years in a row and is going to a new team and has shown that like where his focus is at and how his mentality is in terms of whether it's team first or me first impacts his, his play on the field. Dom says end of the season was brutal for Diggs. He disappeared. I think a lot of that had to do with the stuff that I'm saying. And a lot of that had to do with him just not wanting to be there anymore. His brother's tweeting about not wanting to be there anymore. All of that kind of stuff. I also completely agree with Dom's earlier comment here that I noticed as I was going through. It's a really tough one to parse. It's going to be fascinating to see how the Texans target tree shapes up. I'm giving you sort of my best guesses here because it is fascinating. I love digging into this one. And I also like this point, mostly worried about TDs for Diggs in round 3. Also probably won't get deep looks. I think that's like a risk for Diggs. No deep looks because Tank Dell was the high ADOT guy. And I think you're going to get Nico as the more vertical. And like Diggs is going to wind up as maybe like the veteran possession guy, fancy PPR specialist, as Dom goes on to call him here. I like that note as well as like a risk, as a concern. But when you think about the overall targets, how am I going to project the targets? The Tank Dell season is really, really good, but this targets per route run at this high ADOT, like, can he maintain that when instead of Robert Woods running 400 routes and being what he is, you have Stephon Diggs running those other routes in 3 receiver sets and getting open in that Robert Woods role? I don't know that there's going to be as much of this vertical stuff for Stroud to push downfield on. I also do worry about Tank's size, right? Like, he's really good at getting open in space downfield, but we saw an efficient Tutu Atwell get benched last year because he couldn't play in the run game and those things. Dell gets hurt run blocking in the red zone. I know it was a freak accident, but there are bigger, more physical, players that, I don't know. I mean, linemen get rolled up on all the time. Tight ends get rolled up on all the time. I guess I just feel like you're smaller. You have thinner legs, smaller leg muscles. It's easier for a really big body to roll up on your leg and cause damage. Maybe that's not fair. Maybe it's just a fluke accident. Maybe Dell isn't going to be injury prone throughout his career or anything at all. But in terms of the way that I think through this, I do feel like Dell is that efficient third weapon that could get a little bit forgotten about in the target shares at times. That Diggs and Collins have both shown that they're essentially target earning alphas, and you have a lot of volume going to them, and then you don't need to get to the Dell stuff as frequently, which is a little bit more high risk, a little bit more taking shots downfield. There'll be splash plays. He'll have good production, but I do think it'll be like, I mean, it can still be good enough to pay off at his cost, and I still draft him a ton. Like the guy that I keep thinking is it's like Brandon Ayuk, frankly, as the sort of like the third weapon when you're talking about like McCaffrey and Debo getting a ton of consistent volume underneath, and Kittle, and then Ayuk, they go downfield when they need to Ayuk. Like I often go to this site for just like looking at stats in a list form. Ayuk's game log. This site is fftoday.com. Ayuk's game log, you can see like the 3 reception games. This is from last year. 2 receptions, 3 receptions, down the stretch, 3 receptions in all of those games. Oh, I haven't zoomed in. 3 receptions, 4, 4, 5, 5, 3, 5, 2, 5, 6, 3. There's 8 in week 1. There's a 6 game in week 3, a 6 game down here in 14. 6 and 7 and 16 and 17. For the most part, he's a 5 or lower reception guy. It's all efficiency based, right? Like big plays and everything. And we're taking Ayuk in the second round this year based off of this profile. So it's not like Tank Dell is then a no that we can't draft. But that's where I think like who gets squeezed for targets. I think it's Tank in the more vertical role because there's going to be efficiency underneath. This is the targets per route run piece. I do want to look. Let's just go like this. I'm sorry for the white. So this is what I wrote up before the Diggs trade. I wrote favorably about him the year prior. Nico, I'm just like kind of going to skim what I wrote early in the offseason about these profiles. I said I wrote favorably about him, that I wasn't really in on him enough when draft season came around and proved to be a major mistake. After stepping up from rookie year, I already talked through his targets per out run profile. He's very good. That word is very much out. Tank Dell was the other major hit. Dell didn't match targets after Collins after the target efficiency. This is another point. Yeah, this is why I wanted to come here. God, I wish I could easily pull between streams, but put a pin in that. Dell, so ADOT and yards per target correlate, and Dell had the higher ADOT by a lot. Remember, he was at 14.4, and Collins was more like in like the average range, the 11-ish yard range. But Collins was still better in yards per target. That's how you get such a big gap in their yards per route run. It's not just the volume earning on the targets per route run side, but Collins, especially when you control for ADOT. If you do like an ADOT adjusted yards per target, or I use ADOT adjusted depth adjusted racer, which is the receiving air yards conversion ratio. You're going to see that when you adjust for the depth of the target, because that changes the way that the racer would be, that Collins is going to be much more effective. All right, you know what? I am going to leave this window because I just realized where I can show you guys this. I have it in my stat lookup sheet that I use for my projections. I haven't done this yet, but that far right column there is my depth adjusted racer. Oh, I'm zooming the wrong tab. So this far right column is depth adjusted racer over here. So we'll just look at this. Nico Collins, like anything over like 0.1 depth adjusted racer is incredible. Nico Collins was 0.37 last year. When you adjust for his 11.4 ADOT and you get to an 11.6 yards per target, this is fucking incredible. He was basically average the 2 years prior with bad quarterbacks. Those yards per targets he had in the prior years were right at what you'd expect for his ADOT and his air yards. Tank Dell is also really good at 0.14 depth adjusted racer, for the record. But I'm more confident that Nico is an absolute stud based on, this. How he was that much better than what I would assume for a depth adjusted number when you, okay, I've said this point 4 times. When you account for the fact that Dell's ADOT was 3 yards higher. That's the point that was in my targets per out run profile. I knew there was good stuff in here because I knew I spent a bunch of time on this. I haven't looked at it in a while. The other thing is that Tank Dell's coming back from a leg injury. He's checking in at a very light weight. It gives me concern about his ability to run 600 routes every NFL season. I had a strong take early in the offseason that Collins needed to go higher than Dell. They were going back-to-back early on. They did split right away, and obviously Dell's still going behind him now. So I'm totally comfortable with Dell. But I do think I prefer both Nico and Diggs at their ADPs to Dell at his, even though Dell's a cheaper, and I wind up getting Dell, frankly, more frequently because he's easier to get. Because I do think both Diggs and Collins are the ones that have the potential to be the absolute star. If Stroud defines this season and wins MVP, I think it's Collins or Diggs. And then Dell's an efficient player as well that's good, but I don't think he's 150 targets, man. Like I did say I still want to have exposure to Dell despite that comment about his size, but he was a clear hit because he was a clear hit, a very good fit with Stroud. But then I go down here and I go, part of the very slight hesitancy I have with these two is the competition behind them was so weak. Dalton Schultz was fine. I go in to talk about Noah Brown, who had the career season. As a big part of why he had a career season was Robert Woods, showing his age, etc., being unplayable. So we want pieces of this offense. The only ones that had carved out clear roles were really Collins, Dell, and Schultz. And then I started talking about, like, in a wide receiver heavy class, they could be bringing in a rookie to compete for 3 receiver sets. Obviously, they wind up bringing in Stephon Diggs. I was already concerned about Collins and Dell, the point that I'm driving home, before the Diggs trade, because I thought even a rookie could come in and elevate the competition level and make it harder for these guys to really hit the volume markers that they hit last year that I do think was elevated from... How do I get back to my yards per out run database? I'm trying to just go back. I do think this 26 and this 23.1 and the weighted targets per out run that you see for these guys was elevated by Robert Woods being terrible, by Dalton Schultz just being Dalton Schultz. He's not a volume earner. He's just a dude. But he's going to run a lot of routes and, probably be efficient in this offense, probably score some touchdowns. Oh, the other thing I was going to look in there was the Dalton Schultz stuff. Because I swear I wrote something about his... I can't remember off the top of my head what was the weird thing about his profile. Do you guys remember if he just had a bunch of drops last year? I guess I could just look that up. Schultz was fine. Benefits from big routes numbers. Yeah, I didn't mention drops here, but I think Schultz had like a career high drop season that like really kind of impacted his efficiency. And I just showed he tied his previous career high yards per out run, but basically like it was an outlier. You should fade drops. Like a career high drop season means like 3 or 4 extra drops. But my point is that he got open enough and he got targeted enough that he was actually on his way and should have had a better season than he did, on his way to a career high season. But he held himself back a little bit because of a drops issue that he hasn't otherwise had in his career. That's how I remember it. Yeah, he had 6 drops last year, which is kind of a lot for a not high volume guy. I'm trying to like on Pro Football Focus, I'm trying to check there. So he also had 6 drops in 2022 with the Cowboys. He only had 3 in 2021, which was his other best yards per out run season. He only had 3 in 2020. I think there was some like relatively important drops. I think he maybe dropped a touchdown. I don't know. I can't remember the exact specifics of the Dalton Schultz stuff, but getting back to the wide receivers, you have Nico as a guy that, like, again, because of this adjusted 8-out adjusted efficiency, all of that, I'm very excited about and think he's definitely going to be a hit. And then you have Dell, who I think is really, really good, but I guess the concern is just, does that targets per out run that was 23.1%, does it actually come down in year 2, which you don't usually see for a rookie to a second-year player, but like, I'm not saying he's going to be Chase Claypool, but Chase Claypool's rookie season, 23.6% targets per out run, and at a 13.8 ADOT, 2.0 yards per out run, you can say, like, this guy was a stud. He's going to go on to be a stud. And I think I was arguing at the time similar stuff where, like, the situation helped him elevate. That's why, like, people attack targets per out run. And for me, I'm often like, you got to put the right context into it. You got to understand when there's like nobody else. There's nobody else in the passing game that's really threatening, etc. In Tank's case, it's a small sample as well. That's a little bit of a concern. It's somewhat reminiscent. Now, he's not going to go into Chase Claypool territory, but you see how Claypool's volume has since fallen off. I mean, I suppose Juju Smith-Schuster is probably a similar example where early in his career, you know, he has a 23% targets per out run season, never backs that up. It's not crazy for a player to have 23% targets per out run season and never do it again, which is just me saying that it's not a certainty that Tank Dell is going to build off of this and get even better in year 2. I'm still drafting a lot of Tank Dell. The chat's getting mad. Meatwad's getting mad. He says, "Whoa, Gretch, not too much on Tank, man. Claypool is nuts." It's not a fair comp. Tank Dell's not Chase Claypool. It's not. The comp is simply to show that a rookie who had a really good targets per out run did go backwards. And I'm not saying Tank's definitely going to go backwards, but you have to think through how Robert Woods was this 17% targets per out run with no efficiency on 400 routes, which is a lot. That was, I mean, more than Tank. It was right up there with Nico for most on the team. You're going from this terrible profile to Stephon Diggs, who the last 4 years has been at least a 24.6% targets per out run every year. Maybe Diggs just doesn't fit in the new offense. I think you guys are crazy that are saying like you're just fading him because he's not good enough anymore. Like this, you don't get this type of volume earning profile from being not good anymore. I do think he fell off down the stretch, and I agree with those comments. It's a really intriguing one to think through. But Diggs, especially now he's falling to the later 3rd round, I don't think it would be crazy if he comes in and is the number 1 and kind of pushes Collins to the secondary role, because Diggs has been an alpha for that long. Collins, remember, kind of built up to the 26% last year. I think I could come at his 26% a little bit and say that might come down a little. But I really do like the Nico efficiency. Again, the depth adjusted efficiency, all of that stuff. The 3+ yards per out run is where I'm like, actually, yeah, no, Nico's probably good. And as good as he was when he was by himself in the offense and had to earn volume on his own, that all, I mean, is so promising. For Dell, it's all very promising too, man, in a vacuum. It's very, very promising, and I'm drafting a lot of Tank Dell. That's the most important element. But in terms of trying to parse, I think people are just, it's easy for people to just be like, don't draft the old receiver, which is Stephon Diggs. And in terms of trying to parse, the profile that I get most concerned about is Dell. That's the way that the ADP is playing it. I think they're all draftable. Probably if Stroud has the awesome year, it is Nico. And I thought it was right from the market that Nico and Diggs have started to split. Nico's kind of going even higher in the second round sometimes, and Diggs is falling into the third. For a while, they're going back to back. I was trying to figure out who I liked more. I do think it's right that like it's the prime player who just had the 3+ yards per out run with this quarterback in this offense last year that is the hit if this all hits. But I don't think Diggs is nothing. I don't think he's an also-ran. I don't think, I mean, he could be. He could fall off this season. I think if that's what you're expecting, I wouldn't expect. Looking through your guys' comments a little bit. There's a lot of good comments, but I'm already past 3 hours. This is what happens at this point. There's some good questions in here that I just can't get into right now. I always say this about this point of the stream. If you have questions, put them in the comments after. I will, if you go read the comments of the last videos, you'll see that like the good questions I write a ton of words for. There's a lot of good content in the comments. It's not just, it helps my algorithm and all that stuff, but it's not just for me, for the algorithm and all that. Like I'm going to actually go in there and answer your question. And if it's if you just throw a comment in there to help the algorithm, I appreciate that. And I usually say a thanks for watching or something in reply as well. But if you're asking a real question in there, I'm going to give you a real answer. And that's a good place to get some thoughts from me as well on some of these questions. I'm going to jump back over to the drafts and finish up because we are past 3 hours. And as fun as this has been, I'm not going to do another 4-hour stream today. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 puppies, Superflex puppies, and 2 marathons came on the clock here. Let's do those first. We're going to save the puppies for last. This marathon, I am in the 5-hole. I went Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp. I think I've already talked through this sort of idea. Trey McBride, Dalton Kincaid is interesting. Really went heavy with the tight ends. Roma Dunze in the 6th. Kyler in the 7th to stack with McBride, a directional bet. I don't know that I like this as a marathon team. Rashee Rice at 93 is, a really fortunate thing. People not wanting him because of the marathon, because of a suspension, aren't really thinking through the element of, number one, we don't know how long the suspension is going to be. It could be short. Number two, the games he misses, he's not hitting your lineup. You have other options. Ideally, early in the year, all my other guys are healthy and productive, and I'm, flexing other players. And then later in the year when Rice hits, he's got the 1 week potential every week to be a really nice play from the 92 ADP or draft slot. That's not his ADP. I go Mostert, Javonte Williams, some veterans. Mostert especially, everyone is drafting way lower because I think he's going to get hurt. But even if he only plays 8 games, it's the inverse of what I just said for Rice. In those 8 games, he's going to hit my lineup a lot of the time. Guy scored 21 touchdowns to lead the NFL last year. You're going to be pleased with Raheem Mostert at pick 101 in a marathon, I think, as long as he plays like half the year. It's going to be helpful. Javonte, really stable production throughout, should be helpful. I think a lot of volume. And then I took Tua as my second QB, pairs with Tyreek and Mostert. So this team, I got some directional bets. In the marathon, you're not correlating, none of this overlay stuff matters. You're not correlating weeks 15, 16, 17. You are thinking through directional team bets. So Kyler Murray and Trey McBride have some correlated outcomes. We just talked about the Texans. The Stroud, Nico Collins stuff went the same direction, right? This case, I'm talking about Tua and Mostert and Tyreek Hill. Mostert stays healthy. The Dolphins win the division. They have the ceiling season that we haven't totally seen yet from Mike McDaniel's version of this offense, and they're the team. And Tua's a stud, and Tyreek is awesome and has a 2,000-yard season, and Mostert has 20 touchdowns again, because that's certainly, it's what he did last year. It's certainly possible. So yeah, some directional bets like that I think make a lot of sense. Right now, this is a 2-2-5-2 build. Usually I have 6 receivers at this point. I took the 2 early tight ends with McBride and Kincaid, and you see how that impacts the receiver depth. That's something I would be concerned about, because if Rice does miss time with the suspension, if Odunze is not ready yet early, it does put a lot on Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, and Cooper Kupp. I like Rice as a wide receiver 6 in that setup that I just described, where you're just getting his wins. I don't know how much I like him as a wide receiver 5 in that setup, but it is what it is. I'm not going to try to save wide receiver right now. I don't think it's the right move to be chasing Darnell Mooney. Although in a marathon, somebody like Mooney, who I think will run a lot of routes, has some value. Quentin Johnston's probably going to be pretty solid in a marathon. He might lose his job late in the year, but he's going to run a lot of routes, and they're going to give him a lot of volume along the way. Those types of players that are mostly just routes-based plays, I think make a little more sense in a full season setup, where their spike weeks will hit your profile, and they're going to have volume. So the weeks where they get 7 or 8 targets are going to hit your team. But really, this is the running back pocket, in almost every draft for me. I was trying to find Kedre Miller. There he is, 1 pick before me. I can't take him in every single draft, but I wish I could. Dowdle is an intriguing pick in this format. I mean, probably just gets used enough throughout the year. To win the marathon, you really do need spike weeks. Like, it's not just, you got to score enough points to beat the regular season champion last year had Mostert and Kyron Williams and stuff. And Kyron Williams is a great example of a player that missed 4 weeks on IR, and yet all of his other weeks were so spike weeky, 20 plus points, that he was so impactful for best ball. The weeks he was out, you needed other running backs to produce, but provided some Kyron team was going to have that. That's the way to put it. If you're going to win the marathon, some Kyron team was going to have his spike weeks and going to have other running back production during the IR weeks. That is sort of how I'm thinking through the Mostert thing. That's sort of how I'm thinking through the Rashee Rice thing. If those guys have enough spike weeks while actually playing, they make a lot of sense. I don't know that Dowdle does as much. Like, it's nice that he's going to probably have a role throughout the year, and Zeke's not very good and all that stuff. But does he give me enough spike weeks? But this is a 0 RB build. I didn't take a running back until after pick 100. In some respects, I want to win on QB points. I want to win on spike tight end points. When you have both Trey McBride and Dalton Kincaid, your expectation is that you have the most tight end points in the entire tournament. If you're going to try to win the marathon, you definitely need to win at tight end. And those guys are also hitting my flex. That's part of the help with the Rashee Rice being the wide receiver 5, is those guys should hopefully be hitting my flex some. If you're taking them in the round 4, round 5, double elite tight end, that's a lot of capital. That's a big bet. I recognize that's a lot of capital. I recognize that's a big bet. And the way that it works, and the only way that it works, is if they're both right directionally for the whole season, and they're right together in a way that provides me a huge benefit at tight end and flex help. And I recognize that a lot of people think that can't happen. I think it's possible, and I think it's worth considering, especially in a format like the marathon, where you basically have to hit the nuts. And so if McBride and Kincaid both hit huge ceilings and are the tight end 1, tight end 2, and kind of by a lot, and you have them both, I mean, your tight end points, the people who have McBride are gonna get a lot of tight end points. The people who have Kincaid are gonna get a lot of tight end points, but you're gonna get that much more, and the flex help. It is gonna make a difference if these are the top 2 tight end producers, and I think it's possible. So it's one more reason I probably don't need to hammer receiver or chase receiver too much if I'm playing tight end that way. And it's another reason why running back to a certain degree can be a little bit floor. Marshawn Lloyd's my favorite pick here, but he's more likely to swing around to 149. This is probably a running back turn. Dowdle's behind ADP. I'm going to talk myself into a pretty boring pick there, because I think it helps the 0 RB build from a floor perspective. And I think all the other running backs I'm going to take are going to be pretty upside flyers now. So you're going to get probably not Jalen Wright, but maybe a Jalen Wright even to add to my Miami stuff. Because like if Achane missed time, both Mostert and Wright could be good. And if Mostert misses time, certainly that's beneficial to Wright. I'm not really trying to handcuff, but Mostert's already such a clear value if he doesn't miss time that it's a unique situation. Marshawn Lloyd is the pick I would love to see come through. Ty Chandler is the other one I was considering there as well that I think has a solid floor plus some ceiling. Later, Vidal, Wright. I'm just going to start clicking stars. Chandler, Lloyd, Jalen Wright. I don't really think Algier and Antonio Gibson are the ceiling plays. Gibson would be more like a floor play, but I already got Javonte and Rico. Kamani Vidal. I think Bucky Irving definitely fits in this group. I mean, a Braylon Allen. You start to get into the handcuff stuff. Tyrone Tracy. I'm going to take several of these types of backs. And so if I'm going to win the marathon, it's because these guys are giving me ceiling weeks and I'm getting some floor plus hopefully some ceiling weeks out of the guys that I've already drafted. Maybe Dowdle has a couple 2-touchdown games. Would you take Chandler there if his bye didn't line up with Mostert's? That was definitely something that crossed my mind, was that Dowdle's week 7 bye not only doesn't line up with the two guys I had, but isn't going to line up with like Lloyd or Wright or Vidal. None of my later running back targets that I'm looking at have week 7 buys. And I've done enough of these drafts where like I run into the problems where, so Chandler's week 6 buy is a little bit of an issue with some of the guys that come. Lloyd's week 10, not usually an issue. Lloyd sometimes I run into if I already have Charbonnet on my team. They both have a 10. And I didn't have a 10 yet. Lloyd could have been the pick. But yeah, no, Chandler, that was certainly something I was considering with Chandler. I'm just sort of looking now if are there any other issues. I guess Bucky and Tyrone Tracy, I'm running into that sometimes too. When I take both of them late, but I tell myself at that point, it's like they're both really kind of low probability bets late that like the likelihood that both hit in a big way isn't great anyway. So like I'm kind of just hoping one of these guys is a contributor. And at that point, them having the same week 11 bye isn't a huge deal. If they both hit in a big way, it's also like, all right, man, 2 of my late round running backs hit. I don't really care that they have the same bye. Like that's also not the end of the world. Just like when you start to get to those really cheaper bets to even hit, I care less about the buy because I'm already thinking a ton of the weeks they're not going to be producing anyway. Like I think that's one of the silly things with the Eliminator too. When people start counting buys, I mean, you still want to look at the buy with the Eliminator for sure. Let me restart. I don't want to even bring up the Eliminator because the buys are very, very important in the Eliminator. But like anywhere where you're thinking through buys, the late round picks, you're not going to get usable weeks every week from anyway. And so like if you're going to have some real floor weeks throughout, what's the difference between those floor weeks and the bye week? I mean, the one thing is that on the bye week you're getting a 0, and so if you don't have a backup at a certain position, you're taking a 0 that week. If you take a guy who doesn't have any chance of hitting a usable week that week, at the same time, like I'm not too exact with it in the late rounds because it's like Tyrone Tracy's whole thesis might just be that he hits late in the year for 3 spike weeks between week 10 and week 17. And that could be the whole thing. And that would pay off his price. That could be the thing that makes him a great pick. If that's the case, though, the first 9 weeks were all a buy for him, right? Like none of it mattered. All right, let's jump into the other marathon. I got JJ McCarthy in the queue. That's never a good sign. Brock Purdy, Kyron Williams, James Conner, a fun marathon pick because he could just hold that job the whole year. Chase Brown, Marshawn Lloyd, Justin Jefferson, Devonta Adams, Keenan Allen, Rashee Rice as the RB or the wide receiver 4 in this one, way ahead of ADP. Got pretty aggressive in this one. Jerry Jeudy as the wide receiver 5, Trey McBride, George Kittle, similar build. I went 2 elite tight ends in this one too. I think probably did that more than I would have liked to in the marathon. I'm starting to come around to the idea that you got to just take your 1 elite QB tight end, especially in some specific formats, and hit the other tight ends late. One of the big formats for me is the super flexes. I'm really glad on the ones that I didn't do 2 elite tight ends because I can do the late backdoor stacks I talked about this on the last stream, but like I had one where I had Bryce Young and Bo Nix, and I took Jatavian Sanders and Greg Dulcich, made it a 3 tight end build. It's like a Trey McBride, Jatavian Sanders, Greg Dulcich, and I get my quarterback stacked with it's a 20-round draft over there, and you have to stack more quarterbacks because it's super flex. And so having those available tight end picks to make, like Pete's been talking about this in some of his content recently. Like if you make too many wide receiver tight end picks early on, you don't have room to add any to your build. Like it becomes an imbalance issue. And that you run into that when you do zero RB stuff and you do early tight end stuff. It's like, I can't draft a third tight end, but I need to stack. So, Dom's apparently a Montana fan. Good to know he can't move to Montana just yet. Catching up on the stream. So I don't have a QB2 in this build. It's a marathon. I don't know, like, that whole point about the stacks, probably the point I was trying to drive home to myself here. Oh, I bet you I had Watson in there as well because you have Judy. Probably part of the reason I took Judy here was to set up another stack in this mid-range. Watson goes one pick before me. I took Lloyd with my last pick over Dowdle. I usually do, and over Ty Chandler. Although I was really mad about this. This is one of my first blown picks in terms of format. I messed up. I took I thought through this and it was like late at night and I was kind of tired. And I was debating Lloyd or Chandler really in this one. Because I didn't need the Dowdle pick when I already had Connor. It was like, yeah, I'm already like stable enough. I need some ceiling. That's what I took with Chase Brown. And I wound up taking Lloyd because of the Jefferson thing. And I think that's maybe why I put McCarthy in the queue. I was like, oh, I'll have a Minnesota stack with the Green Bay bring back. And then as soon as I took the pick, I was like, oh, you dumbass. This is a marathon. The week 17 matchup couldn't matter less. And what I was thinking through specifically was Lloyd and Ty Chandler. Because Ty Chandler would be a directional bet on the Minnesota offense where I could take him and then take McCarthy and have all three of them and be like, yeah, Minnesota's good. McCarthy's good. Ty Chandler's good. Justin Jefferson's good. And this is a great question, Adam, but it's going to have to be one for a stream later in the summer. Based on your weighted targets per run stat, who do you think are some underrated values this year? There's some veterans, Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins continue to earn volume in big ways last year. Hopkins has a little bit more competition than I'd like in an offense where I don't love the QB, but I'm still taking Devontae Adams more than some other people who aren't as into the older players because he still earned volume in a big way last year. Chris Olave, big reason why I was on him. Weighted targets per out run stuff is really strong. I said I would have to wait, and now I'm just like, okay, let's talk about this because it's a good question. I have the sortable list here. This is the league leaders in weighted targets per out run last year. So Tyreek Hill was the league leader. The column's way on the right. Tyreek Hill was the league leader. Hopkins and Adams were actually tied for second in the league. Like they earned a lot of volume on their per route stuff. For Hopkins, the routes are going to be a little bit of a concern. The offense is going to be a concern. But Adams was second in the NFL in targets, earned a bunch of targets. Behind only Lamb. Jefferson was still great. Olave was great. AJ Brown, Diggs right up there. You see Nico and Dell up here. So yeah, Diggs, Nico, and Dell are all, among the league leaders. You got Waddle up here, even though Tyreek Hill was already up here. Evans and Keenan Allen continued to produce. They were a good example for what Diggs is. They were the guys last year that people were down on Evans and Keenan Allen. Allen was injured the year prior. Evans wasn't as efficient the year prior. And I was more on Godwin than Evans, to be completely fair. But I was talking about the Bucs offense being better than people thought, and I still drafted a lot of Evans, so I can still claim him as a win. I had a lot of Evans, and part of that was his targets per out run, weighted targets per out run profile, going into last year, and then he had another strong year. Like good players tend to, but both of those guys were in the same offense. The case you can make for Diggs is he's changing teams. Like you can be out on him. Puka, Ayuk's really good, but it's just like, does he run enough routes? And how much more efficient can he really be? Because he's already super efficient. Deontay Johnson's a good one. There's an underrated value. I mean, people think he's just a low ADOT guy. He earns volume, man. Amari Cooper had a season high, a career high yards per out run, earned a lot of volume. Michael Williams barely played. See Garrett Wilson come in here. He just ran a ton of routes, which kind of, can make it hard to be like super elite at the stat, but he was still very good at it. Odell ran very few routes. Like the difference between Garrett Wilson and Odell Beckham is right here. 674 routes, 295. Odell was only playing. I mean, that's like that goes back to the raw targets, 163 to 62. I would just trust the raw targets on those profiles. Odell was really only playing when he was like going to get the ball kind of a thing, drawing up plays for him. Similar with Kendrick Bourne. I mean, he's okay. Jaden Reed, I'm probably a little bit too off on. I said on ship chasing this week, Sean's never going to get me on Jaden Reed, and then he kind of got me on Jaden Reed yesterday. All right. This is a good question, but I'm gonna go back to the draft. The marathon that I was in that I was mad about taking Marshawn Lloyd over Ty Chandler because I didn't make a directional bet on Minnesota. I think those directional bets make a lot of sense in the marathon. Lance says, do you think the marathon's bad to enter right now? Seems like live players are huge and people drafting late August will have all that info. Yeah. I mean, that's a fair point. You just can't wait for August for every draft, I mean, I don't know. I like the marathon format. I do think you're going to get some big values, but you're right about like the live players and the late August having an advantage. I more or less just enjoy drafting. So it's like, yeah, I mean, in this case, it's not the perfect thing, but I want to be making draft picks in June. So I gotta draft some format. That's a big reason why I entered so many of the puppy super flex drafts is because it was going to close. And I like the ones that close and everyone's in the contest drafted with the same info. I definitely prefer those when I'm drafting at this time, but I can't always get into all of them. All right, let's talk through this pick. I got the 1 QB in a marathon. I kind of want to see if like Purdy's my only QB. Aaron Rodgers doesn't stack in any kind of way. I've never tried to backdoor him. I mean, you're talking about at this point, one of these types of guys being a backdoor stack option. Bryce Young, Drake May, Bo Nix, Daniel Jones with Wan'Dale Robinson, maybe. Daniel Jones makes a lot of sense in a marathon. People are worried about him getting benched for the playoff games, but he's going to play most of the season, and he's going to provide something to a QB build, which would mean getting Wan'Dale. A 163 ADP relatively soon. I pick at 163 on my next pick. I could just take like a Slayton late for him as well. I don't have a Miami running back on this team yet, and Jalen Wright is staring me in the face. You kind of have to draft Miami running backs when you get the chance. Or Vidal. I mean, those are both just such good picks here that I don't want to set up a stack that I might not even be able to complete later. I want to make the best pick in this range. I have a lot of good running backs. I'm going to need the running backs to help with the flex position, I think, on this team a little. Although this team's, with the 2 tight ends, it's not as deep at receiver, but Judy's a pretty nice wide receiver 5. The Rashee Rice suspension could be a problem. Jalen Wright to me is tough in the marathon because I think there's a lot of scenarios where he just doesn't play a lot all year. If it's Mostert and it's Achane, Vidal to me has a path to just like playing kind of a lot. I kind of want to take Vidal over Wright, but Wright's the ceiling. I was just talking in the marathon. You got to be right about the ceiling stuff. The Miami backfield is the one that like Achane and Mostert combined for 32 touchdowns last year. I mean, it seems like a Miami running back's going to be right. And so if you're going to win the marathon, I want to be in on the situational stuff that I'm like, yeah, like a Miami running back was right. It was Jalen Wright. His name is right. 3.5 hours in. Been here the whole time. Appreciate you, Chris. Where can you buy a t-shirt? I have no idea. We'll eventually figure that out. All right. It is getting too long though, because I was going to do a workout at 11. We're approaching that. 5 puppies. And these take so long. All right. This is a 3-2-6-2 build. Anthony Richardson, Daniel Jones, Aiden O'Connell. Oh, this team sucks. Jonathan Brooks and Devin Singletary, Amon-Ra, Drake London, Malik Neighbors, Stephon Diggs, Rashee Rice, Adonai Mitchell, Kyle Pitts, and George Kittle. So I did get Neighbors and A.D. Mitchell to pair with Richardson and Jones. They play each other week 17. Aiden O'Connell isn't even stacked. Of course he isn't. I have Josh Downs there, but I already have O'Connell. I mean, I already have Mitchell. I don't actually like the Josh Downs pick, if I'm being honest with you guys. Everyone is really in on that I know. He was good last year, but he lost a lot of volume because of the RPO heavy offense that went directly to Pittman. And then I think Mitchell's like your big play, like correlated bet, but really Richardson rushing is the reason I'm not drafting Pittman or anything. And Downs to me is like probably not going to be a splash play receiver. I like the profile, but I don't like the volume in the offense. I'm going to be one of the few people that drafts like me that's not taking a lot of Downs. And I don't think I need to throw him onto this build necessarily. Judy is a good pick there, but really I need a running back. All I have is Jonathan Brooks and Devin Singletary. This team has to get some running backs. And it's, God, man, it's pretty clearly Jalen Wright, isn't it? Nick Chubb is still available. At what point do you just take Nick Chubb? Yeah, Huham says Jelani's my go-to A-Rich stack. That kind of thing is like, that's what I like. It's so funny. This has been so long that like people are jumping in with sidekick commentary. Crypto Grady just got here, said his average watch time is like 4 minutes. So he's probably watching the part where I was talking about average watch time at the very beginning. Are we undervaluing Ray Davis? I'd take some Ray Davis. I think he's got some ceiling. The profile's not great. And Josh Allen's going to score some rushing TDs. I mean, yeah, maybe I'm undervaluing him a little bit. I just think the Vidal path is so much better. You don't have a James Cook there. I think I'm going to take Nick Chubb this late, man. It doesn't fit with Jonathan Brooks, who's probably not going to play a lot early in the year. It doesn't make a lot of sense on any other terms. This team already sucks. Can't really justify the pick other than it's an ADP value of 15 picks. And I think then it gives me a better chance of getting, more total running back value into this build if I just take Chubb and let like maybe Vidal get to me at the next pick. Like that's the pick I wanted to make was Vidal. It could have been Jalen Wright as well. You know what? I'm not even going to justify it. That was a bad pick and it's just a bad team. All right. My other best ball team, or super flex team, Kyler Murray, Bo Nix, and Aiden O'Connell. At least Aiden O'Connell stacked with Bowers probably on this one, and he is. Okay, Kyler, Bo Nix, Aiden O'Connell, Bijan, Javonte Williams, Chase Brown, Jalen Wright. Like, that's fun. Brandon Ayuk, Zay Flowers, Tank Dell, Xavier Worthy, JSN. Interesting. No, like, real big target earners in there, Sam Laporta and Brock Bowers at tight end. It's a Bijan team. That's part of why, I got Ayuk. Kyler, Bo Nix, and O'Connell. I don't even have the Bo Nix stack yet. I'm at 180 and 181. I could take both Franklin and Mims ahead of ADP here. But I already have 2 week 14 bye wide receivers. They just add to that. I got the Tank Dell Zay Flowers mini, but not stacked up with a QB. Oh, I have Javonte Williams with Bo Nix. Okay. Antonio Gibson, Bucky Irving is there. I don't have Kyler stacked up at all. Okay. This team has some stack work to do. I could take Michael Wilson here ahead of ADP as well. Marvin Mims is going to be one of the picks. I take Mims over Franklin. I think he plays more. Sean made a good case to me yesterday that Franklin's probably the better bet to just be a massive hit and be the number one in an offense that isn't shaped the way that we think it will be. The Arizona guy I want to take is Greg Dortch. I don't like the Wilson Zay Jones thing because I think they're competing for the same types of snaps. You have MHJ on the other side, you have Trey McBride, and then you have Dortch in the slot. They're talking up Dortch. Hopefully I can get Dortch back. I'm going to risk it because at 204, 205, I mean, Zay should also be there, and Michael Wilson could potentially even be there since I'm the Kyler drafter. I don't think I have to go Arizona here. I am glad to get and it would mean I'd have to reach on both guys in this slot. I was okay to reach on Mims there. He might have made it all the way back, but I wanted to get a Denver guy. I mean, I would have justified it by just reaching on Franklin instead of and trying to let Mims fall. But I need to take an Arizona guy at the next turn. I don't really need to take both Mims and Franklin when I already have Javonte, Chase, bring back Bo Nix. I kind of already have the Denver stuff built out. I need these other picks to build out the Arizona and potentially Rams thing. If DeMarcus Robinson comes back, I could get DeMarcus Robinson as the bring back, which means the other pick right now should be my 5th running back because my next turn might be 2 more receivers. And so Gibson is there, Antonio Gibson. I don't have that correlated at all. And he's a fine pick, but on a Bijan team with an anchor running back like that, and then Javonte Williams, who I think is a really good play for a lot of volume, I don't really feel like I need the Gibson play. I have Chase Brown and Jalen Wright, some upside swings. I mean, this is just an excuse for me to get more Bucky Irving, but like Bucky Irving fits the texture of this running back room better. It gives me more upside. And then I'll make my Arizona and hopefully my DeMarcus Robinson bring back picks at the next turn. And then I will have 2 more picks after that. And I'll be able to take some kind of late flyer at running back as an RB6 and probably RB7. I'll probably take 2 really late running backs, maybe Audric Estime, maybe Dylan Laube to go with Aiden O'Connell. I don't know who will be there at those turns, obviously, but cool. So this is what I'm talking about with the Superflex ones. You really got to kind of think through multiple different stacks too. It's all 4 positions, and it's more stacks and game stacks and bring backs, and these late rounds get complicated. Man, Jahan Dotson has fallen this far. So I told you guys I've passed Dotson even when he's the obvious pick. The last turn, or at the last pick I was at, he was a 4-pick discount on ADP. I took Xavier Legette ahead of ADP, bypassing Dotson, even though I did not have Jaden Daniels stacked yet. And yet he makes it back to me at 174, 11 picks later. So now Jahan Dotson is 15 picks behind ADP, and I don't have Jaden Daniels stacked. I didn't even need to, Legette wasn't stacked. This team is CJ Stroud, Jaden Daniels, Aiden O'Connell. It's another one where I needed to add O'Connell. I do think Aiden O'Connell is underpriced in Superflex, but a big part of this is that Stroud and Daniels have the same buy. I had to have something that resembled QB production for week 14, so I wasn't guaranteed to take a 0. And O'Connell gave me some access to that at pick 139, and I had Bowers already at pick 115 on this build. The running backs are Kyren Williams, Devin Singletary, and Ty Chandler. Only 3. So if I want to pass Dotson again, I can justify it with a running back pick. Drake London, Nico Collins, T. Higgins, Keenan Allen, Jordan Addison, and Xavier Legette are the 6 receivers. I really don't need more receivers. Kind of curious about why I took Legette there instead of just taking Jalen Wright. I don't have Bryce Young on this team, which I do on a lot of the super flexes. I don't really know the deal with the Legette pick other than I was just not wanting to take Dotson and I guess, kind of keying in on receiver. I still would like to wait and stack Jaden Daniels with Luke McCaffrey. The running back picks Bucky Irving. That's part of the Legette pick. I can bring back Irving. It's just an excuse to take more Bucky Irving. Everything's an excuse to take more Bucky Irving. I'm going to take Dotson. At a certain point, I mean, it's so funny that I was talking about him being like undraftable as the correlated piece, but 15 picks behind ADP, we're at pick 174. I have Stroud stacked up with Nico and the Andrews bring back. I have Aiden O'Connell stacked up with Brock Bowers. I do not have a New Orleans bring back. I didn't get Kendre Miller or Chris Olave are really the only Saints that I wind up drafting much of. But I finally just took the ADP value and drafted Dotson. Whatever. Is what it is. I can't have McCaffrey on every team. Maybe Dotson has a bounce back year. 3-4-6-2 in this other super flex, Lamar Jackson, Caleb Williams, and Daniel Jones. We have Javonte Williams, Kendre Miller, Jalen Wright, and Kamani Vidal at running back. Pretty zero RBE situation where Kendre Miller's the 2, Jalen Wright's the 3, Kamani Vidal's the 4. Really pushed it here. In part so I could go Lamar, Caleb, and take Daniel Jones. In part because I have 2 elite tight ends, I would guess, and I don't. I have Dalton Schultz, Mark Andrews, Dalton Schultz. So how good are these receivers? They better be good. Garrett Wilson, Jalen Waddle, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, JSN, Rashee Rice. So I took both DJ Moore and Keenan Allen to stack up Caleb Williams in those middle rounds. I had Andrews as the stack with Lamar and brought him back with Dalton Schultz. I have not stacked Daniel Jones yet. I just got him at a 13-point discount and liked that and took him, which means I need Wan'Dale Robinson. And Wan'Dale Robinson went right at ADP at 186. I needed him to fall at 189. I don't get Wan'Dale Robinson, which means I'm playing for, I don't know, Darius Slayton. No, that makes the pick Tyrone Tracy over Bucky Irving. You guys, I'm choosing not to pick Bucky Irving. I got Caleb stacked up. I got to bring back with him on JSN as well. The Chicago-Seattle stuff is all really nice. And I have Lamar stacked with Andrews and the Schultz bring back. And then I have Garrett Wilson and Jalen Waddle at the top, unstacked. But, I mean, this is a really nice, like, passing roster that has – it needs more running back scratch-offs, right? And it would be Bucky Irving, but I don't have Daniel Jones stacked. And Tyrone Tracy's whole thing is he used to play wide receiver. Like, he's a pass-catching back. So this pick becomes Tracy, just 2 picks ahead of Tracy's ADP. It was actually behind Bucky's ADP. That hurt me a little bit. All right. What's the argument for being so high on Bucky Irving? Someone says Rashad White sucks. The argument for not being so high on him is that he didn't test particularly well. The argument for being so high on him is he was incredibly productive in college. And then the Bucs actually took him like reasonably high. He obviously went in the 4th round, but a lot of running backs go later. And I'm pulling up the draft board just to look at it. Because he didn't test high, he was projected to go like 10th at the running back position, and he wound up going like 7th or something. So it was one of those things where it's like, okay, well, once you get the team buy-in, they're telling you they don't care as much about the He went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He went 6th at the position. He went in round 4, but he was the second running back in round 4 behind only Jalen Wright. He's really, really productive. Like I said, get a little bit of team buy-in. You have really no competition from a third back. Their third back is still like, Chase Edmonds and Sean Tucker and stuff. And then, yes, Rachaad White is a pretty fragile starting running back. He had some real efficiency issues as a runner last year. I think if they had a better running back on the roster last year, that they would have went away from Rachaad White a little bit. He managed to keep the role the whole year because he did do some good stuff in the receiving game as well, but he's not. He's an outright bad runner. When you look at like rushing yards over expected, you look at yards per carry or anything. And I think Irving is like in a standalone role, probably as a number 2 that actually cuts into his role a little bit. Rachaad White's role, that is. Because I just don't see why they would be like, yeah, we have to use White every snap when you have a competent backup now that you did like enough to take as the RB6 in the class. And then I think there's actually ceiling for him to start to really take work, even if White's not hurt. But at this cost, like just being the clear number 2 and just being a handcuff is kind of a win. So we'll get to the last pick here. I got to go. It's 3:50 now, 3 hours and 50 minutes we've been here, guys. Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, Aiden O'Connell, Jonathan Brooks, Jalen Warren, Brian Robinson, Rico Dowdle, Bucky Irving, Drake London, Devonta Adams, Devonta Smith, T. Higgins, Keenan Allen, Brandon Cooks, who I only took to stack with Dak. Kyle Pitts is the only tight end. We are in 16. The reason I've not added another tight end is I don't have Aiden O'Connell. I have Aiden O'Connell with Adams. Oh, and I have Burrow with T. Higgins. But I decided at some point that this will be like the team I just talked about that had the Jatavion Sanders and Greg Dulcich late stacked tight ends. This is one where I'm going to take Gesicki and Michael Mayer if I can get them both on this roster and make it a 3 tight end build that then has, because I have Burrow and Aiden O'Connell, has both of those QBs stacked. It also I threw Ben Sinnott and Noah Fant on here. Fant's a bring back on the Keenan Allen. There's a little correlation. Sinnott must be correlated with Drake London. So there's some, internal correlation, week 17 correlation with those guys. Sinnott also correlates week 16 with Devonta Smith. I don't see any other correlation with those guys, but that was why I jumped. I like both of them too. So not being the ADP value when I've only taken one tight end. Makes him a tough pass. Burrow is already stacked, doesn't have a bring back. So I have the Denver guys at the top of the queue, but don't have to have a bring back on that. Could also be like Audric Estime or Blake Watson later. Josh Reynolds even. I'm not taking Tolbert on this team. I already plugged my nose and took Brandon Cooks. I got the Philly bring back on that. I don't have a New Orleans bring back, but whatever. I think at this point you take the Ben Sinnott value. There's a little bit of internal correlation, like I said, with Drake London on that pick. It gives a little bit of upside too. Like he could just be a good tight end. Rookie, have a good rookie tight end year. It's going to be a 3 tight end build anyway. I will still take one of these stacked or correlated tight ends later, but I might as well, with the draft room saying that Sinnott's the right pick, I might as well take him. I already have 5 running backs on this team, which I usually don't. Although they were all picked after pick 100. They're not like super deep. Whatever. I took Sinnott. We're done. Not on the clock in any leagues, as you see. I'm gonna go. I was gonna go work out at 11. It's already 10:54. I'm gonna have to speed up the rest of my morning. I was only gonna do 3 hours max today. I was gonna try to do it in 2.5. We're at 3:53. God, this is brutal. But hopefully this gets you through the next week. Those of you listening on audio and all that stuff. I won't be back until next Wednesday. I will try to enjoy Montana, the people's champ. I'm gonna get my ass to the gym. I've been sitting in one spot for 4 hours. My watch is like, dude, will you ever stand in another hour again? Like I'm gonna get all those notifications. It's been an hour. Stand. Do some stretching. I will. I appreciate you guys. A lot of fun. If there's any good questions in here that you guys want me to cover, throw them in the comments. I love to come back through and reply to those, usually within a day or so. I'll try to hit those before I go on the road trip tomorrow. Like the stream, follow, subscribe, turn on notifications. Appreciate you guys. It was a fun stream. The biggest reason this went so long is I did not expect to go an hour and a half at the beginning on overlays and fantasy football and how you win at fantasy football and all of these concepts that were really fun to talk about. But we hit on all that stuff. Now we're gonna go. I'll see you guys in a week. Later.